Welcome, everyone, to the fourth episode of Out and Out. This is our series for ex-believers, and it's our pleasure to welcome all of you. I'm the president of the Secular Society of MIT. My name is Sohan D'Souza. So let's begin with a little introduction of the Secular Society of MIT, which is, we aim to be the home of secular thought and action at MIT. And we support non-theists and secularists and promote reason and science. This is actually our fourth episode of Out and Out. We've had events for ex-believers before. We've had an Out and Out for Islam before. We've had an Out and Out involving for ex-Hindus before. We've had an Out and Out for ex-Jews and ex-Christians. And this one is our second episode for ex-Muslims and the fourth episode of Out and Out. So, of course, for ex-Muslims, there's much to be concerned about globally, at least. There are still many countries in which leaving the religion of Islam is a death sentence, and it can result in other repercussions as well. So, even in places where there are no legal repercussions, there can be various forms of self-censorship and so on. So, and a reluctance to discuss the issues, frankly. And then we have something like this as well, where people face all sorts of bigotry on account of being Muslim, being perceived as Muslim, and so on. In this climate, it's tempting to point the finger at ex-Muslims and shame them and question their motives and so on, even deny that there's any kind of penalty for being ex-Muslim. And yet, just like ex-Jews, ex-Christians, ex-Hindus, and ex-everyone else, there are plenty of them who have, basically genuinely think that their former religion is unsubstantiated and regressive. So that's where the denial comes in. And this is something that we want to focus on as well. So we aim to build a strong community of former religious believers, including within and between various ex-religious communities. So with that, let's begin with the Normalizing Dissent. Our first speaker is Sarah Haider. Sarah is an American writer, speaker, and activist. Born in Pakistan and raised in Texas, Sarah spent her early youth as a practicing Shia Muslim. In her late teens, she began to read the Quran critically and left religion soon after. In 2013, she co-founded Ex-Muslims of North America, where she advocates for the acceptance of religious dissent and works to create local support communities for those who have left Islam. In addition to atheism, Sarah is particularly passionate about civic liberties and women's rights. Please welcome Sarah Haider.
Do I need this? It's not even on. Do I need this? Can everyone hear me like this? No. Is this all right? Okay. Well, thank you to the Secular Society of MIT for including us in this Out and Out initiative and for inviting us here. I'm really excited to talk about this topic in particular, but I'll just have a few short notes. Is it better? Can we, oh, like right into it, huh? It's a really interesting topic, human rights and equality, but first, I kind of want to touch a little bit about why we are here to talk about it in the first place. Before you is a panel of ex-Muslim atheists. That is to say, we are people from Muslim backgrounds. We have Muslim family. We have decided to leave the religion and no longer subscribe to any faith or just at all to a concept of a higher power. Some people call us apostates. Others prefer traitor or self-hating bigot or native informant. I know all of us have been called variously these things, sometimes worse. When we criticize our former faith, we are often accused of intolerance, but in fact it is we who are denied tolerance at every turn, even at the most fundamental levels, especially within Muslim majority countries and Muslim communities in the West. Laws restricting apostasy and blasphemy are common in the Muslim world. I'm sure most of you are aware of this, but over a dozen countries today consider apostasy a capital offense. That is to say, something that should be punished by death. Whoa, is that? But the problem doesn't lie in the law alone. Many Muslims in certain countries, vast majorities of Muslims, believe that leaving the faith should be a punishable offense. They agree with those laws. And compounding this issue are the prevailing norms of honor. Honor cultures, which are found all over the world, are very common in communities of Muslim background. They're those where the rights of the individual are secondary to expectations of the family or of the community. And within these cultures, people like us, people who transgress the norms, are punished, usually by the family members themselves, because their own standing in the community is tarnished by this behavior, it's threatened by this behavior, the closer that you are to them. When this behavior comes together with the stigma of leaving the faith, it results in ex-Muslims like us facing ostracization, facing threats, and even physical abuse, usually at the hands of our loved ones. But even after overcoming this, if ex-Muslims began to share their apprehensions about the religion publicly, we face the pressures of a different sort, usually from a different source. Too many on the political left, for the lack of a better term, routinely act as religious apologists for Islam. I believe that this is due to a confused feeling of compassion, a positive feeling of compassion, of the instinct to protect Muslims from harms at the hands of the bigots and xenophobes in our society. But I also believe that this apologism is insincere. And what I mean by this is that they are not motivated necessarily by the truth claim of those words, but they're motivated by what they believe the consequences of those words would be. An example of this I've used in the past is that of President Obama, stating, matter-of-factly, that Islam is a religion that preaches peace. That's what he said. Leaving aside the question of whether or not that statement is true, I don't believe that the president believed in what he said. I believe that he thought it was a very important thing to say. Even if disingenuous, it may seem like maybe this is just a kind of I'm making a harmless nitpick here. Until you recognize that what is actually happening here is that the most prominent leader of a very powerful country, secular country, is declaring as fact what is essentially a theological belief or opinion. When it comes to human rights, this display of apologism can turn very ugly. I've known young, liberal-minded, non-Muslim women who will define modesty culture within Islam as empowering practices like the hijab. I've known feminists who defend the practice of female genital mutilation as a rite of passage, which they have no right to place judgment on. And while it is true that Muslims as a people are unfairly targeted at the hands of bigots, it is also true that Muslims follow a belief system that is propagating some of the most destructive and anti-humanist ideals around today. And I think any serious study into the contents of the religion will make it clear that Islam, as Christianity and Judaism before it, perpetuates horrific human rights abuses, especially against women, against religious minorities, and dissenters within the societies. And this has been established by poll after poll, yet even to mention this state of affairs seems to trigger this instinctive reaction among people on the left. The extent to which these norms coalesce with the law, we have an even greater need for concern. But there's a tendency to dismiss them altogether, either to deny that the abuse exists in the first place, and this comes in the form of a kind of a alternative fact, where I'll say, well, Islam doesn't place women on equal plane with men, and the responsibility, well, actually Muhammad was the first feminist. Worse, there is occasionally the idea that human rights abuses are acceptable because they have wide support from Muslim communities. I'll give one example. In 2007, can you open that? A 26-year-old woman of Moroccan heritage filed for expedited divorce from her husband in Germany. She suffered violence, death threats from her husband, and she had already been awarded a restraining order against him. But her filing for expedited divorce on account of hardship was denied. The German judge, who happened to be a woman, used citations from the Quran to justify her decision. She claimed that a woman who enters into marriage with a Muslim man should have been aware of the potential of a physical discipline within the marriage, and that a Muslim husband exercising his right to do so, quote, does not constitute extreme hardship according to federal law. The judge was widely and rightly criticized for this decision, but it should not be dismissed as a standalone case, as there are increasing confusions and conflicts around the topic of Islam and secular notions of equality. I think Maryam can talk a little bit more about this and what's happening in the UK. And these conflicts are difficult to resolve, particularly because there is a very real xenophobia against Muslims, and because of the dishonesty surrounding the discussion by those who wish to protect Muslims from this xenophobia and bigotry. Well, I believe that, of course, human rights should trump cultural or religious rights, but I have found that there are some who would even hesitate to claim this. The greatest harm of the sort of cultural relativism is to deny the abuse altogether by refusing to make a moral judgment between the two different value systems. And this German judge alone, or isn't alone in believing that some religious customs can supersede secular laws, that human rights should occasionally take a back seat to the demands of religion. And this is why Ex-Muslims North America is traveling the US and Canada on our Normalizing Dissent tour. We've noticed an unwillingness of many to address the role that religion plays in the ways that it to address this role in a way that it is both compassionate to Muslims, respecting their rights and their dignities as citizens, but also while actually honestly addressing the problematic practices and beliefs in that society. So I just said those were just my few notes there, and I'll pass it to Mohammed. I don't know if Sohan wanted to introduce him as well.
Thank you. Please a big hand for Sarah. So our next speaker is Mohammed Syed. Mohammed Syed is a human rights activist, writer, speaker, and community organizer. He's the founder and president of Ex-Muslims of North America, the first ex-Muslim advocacy and community building organization in North America. Mohammed has been a human rights activist for the past decade, with a focus on efforts to normalize religious dissent and promote acceptance of secularism in Muslim communities. Mohammed?
So first I wanted to start off by telling you a bit about, sorry. Can you guys hear me? So first I wanted to start off with telling you a bit about my organization, Ex-Muslims North America. One of the things that we've been focusing on for the past 4 or so years is trying to build up communities of ex-Muslims. Often what happens with ex-Muslims is you leave religion, you're isolated, you don't want to talk about it. People don't talk to their friends, their families, because they're concerned about the consequences. Within Muslim communities and countries, as Sohan pointed out, there are severe consequences, including death. So in order to change that dynamic, we thought we could organize casual get-togethers, meetups where ex-Muslims can meet other ex-Muslims, feel more empowered, feel more normal. One of the common lines we've heard from people time and time again is, I thought I was the only one, and it's great knowing that I'm not insane. In the 21st century, that shouldn't happen anywhere regarding any topic whatsoever. No matter what you believe, what you think, there are 7 billion of us out there. There are other people that think like you. The idea behind it is that by getting people together, they feel stronger, they feel empowered, and they start speaking up about their issues. They start speaking up and trying to foment change within their homes, within their communities, within their countries. And we've already seen that happen. And it's wonderful when you see somebody that started attending our events and was in the closet, was not willing to speak to anybody about it, coming out to his friends, coming out to his family, his own family members leaving as a result of it as well. We've had entire families leave religion simply because one person left and started talking to them. And that sort of has a network effect where the idea of leaving Islam becomes normalized. It's not so much of a taboo. And over the past 5 to 10 years, we've already seen that change dramatically, which is very, very heartening for me at least. Beyond that, beyond the community organizing, we're doing the student campus tour where we're trying to get the idea of ex-Muslims to penetrate the mainstream where people around the world know about it. We just had an article published in BBC Persia, which is awesome now because people in Iran know that the ex-Muslims are organizing. That will hopefully empower people over there to start doing similar work as well. We're also producing a video series, Life Beyond Faith, which is highlighting how ex-Muslims are doing after leaving faith. The aim is to empower people to realize that leaving religion, while traumatic, can be overcome, and you can live a full, wonderful life without the need for Allah. About the topic itself, it's going to be a bit controversial because we're talking about large issues that affect everybody around the world. One of the most often cited lines that I heard, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard as well, regarding equality within Islam was related to the last sermon that Muhammad gave during a Hajj. And one of the key lines from it was, there's no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, or a non-Arab over an Arab, except for their degree of piety. And generally that's regarded as a universalist, equal rights statement. But if you look at it, it's more about converting the tribe, the in-group and the out-group, to a religious and non-religious context from an ethnic context. So it's broadening the definition or changing the definition to if you're religious or if you're not religious, your worth is dependent upon that. As long as the definition of equality is based on piety, I posit that humanitarian civil equality cannot be achieved. This claim of piety being a marker of who is worthwhile and who is not worthwhile informs pretty much every aspect of how Islam views reality. There's another similar claim that is made that everyone is born Muslim. And the idea within an Islamic cosmology is that when the souls were first created, they all pledged allegiance to Allah. And therefore, when you're born a Muslim, you may choose another path. And it's also reflected in the verbiage Muslims use. When somebody converts to Islam, the phrase used is revert. You reverted to Islam because your original authentic state was Islam. This is a supremacist claim. This is a claim that our view is the right view, and everybody falls within that view. What does this imply? This implies that those that are leaving Islam or those that are not embracing Islam, they're denying the truth. They're rejecting the truth. And that particularly applies to apostates because we were actually Muslim practicing at some point before we left Islam. So what should be the fate of somebody that is a concealer of truth or a denier of truth? In an Islamic context, it is you're breaking your sacred covenant with God, and the punishment for that is death. If you look at there are various schools of thought within Islam, within Sunni Islam in particular, all of them are unanimous that apostates should be put to death. The distinction drawn is women should be imprisoned for life, men should be killed. So even there you see a difference between how the sexes are treated. If there is equality, the treatment would be the same. Even within how they treat ex-Muslims, you see a certain amount of sexism there. Not content with simply ending the lives of ex-Muslim, there's a broader context where civil death of ex-Muslims happen as well, in the sense that you lose all, even if you survive somehow, you leave the country, whatever else, you lose all rights to your children, you lose all rights to your property, your marriages are automatically dissolved. A lot of ex-Muslims don't come out because of the fact that they're concerned that their wives will leave them, their wives' families will force them, the state will force them, and we see that. The state in many Muslim countries forces the marriage to be dissolved. The same sort of thing extends to a broader view of the world. Many of you have heard of the Shia-Sunni conflicts going around in Yemen and in Iraq. That's an extension of the same concept that our view of Islam is the right view and their view is a wrong view, and therefore their lives are forfeit. You see the same thing in various other secondary groups. There's a group called Ahmadi in Pakistan, and they believe that there's another prophet or another saint-like figure after Muhammad. And therefore, in the Pakistani constitution, there's a specific amendment saying that these guys are not Muslim. And you have to sign, if you're going to Pakistan or if you're applying for an ID card or a passport, you have to sign a form saying that you acknowledge that these people are not Muslim. So it's not about what they're saying. The state is mandating what is or is not Muslim. And as you would expect, you see violence as a result of that. And throughout history, the same phenomena occurs again and again. You could look at the Ottoman Empire versus the Safavid Empire, or any other aspect of that where violence against those that differ from the mainstream, not just rejected, but change it slightly, are attacked as the same as apostates are. And this is one of the problems that reformists face regularly as well. If you look at, we were talking about women's rights, the same conception affects how women are viewed in Islam as well. There's a saying by Muhammad about women will be the primary denizens of hell. And why is that? Because they lack in intelligence and they lack in piety. Piety is a big part of it. They can't pray throughout the month because of periods, and therefore they can't be as religious as Muslims. They can't have the same heaven points, Jannah points as men can, and therefore they will suffer. Within the Quran, there is a very popular verse in this conversation about wife beating. But if you broaden the context of the verse, it talks about how if women are disobedient to their husbands, then this penalty is imposed. Even if you ignore the fact that it is talking about domestic violence, that whole conception of women being subservient to men talks about a divine cosmology where there's a certain order where men are subservient to God, women are subservient to men, and that also incurs a responsibility on men to keep women in line religiously and keep their children in line, because that responsibility falls on them, and God then will affect them, will punish them for not keeping their women in line or their children in line. One of the issues is that within Muslim communities generally, there's a sort of idea that we have a noble past, and we see this in the West as well, when people are hesitant to talk about the horrors that have been committed by the West. We want to have this idea that we were wonderful, our ancestors were wonderful, they did wonderful and noble things, and therefore it's hard to look into your past critically. But all of us are human, all of our pasts are checkered, all of us have done, our ancestors have done horrible things, because that was the state of humanity. And so when a few years, actually last year, Michelle Obama brought up the fact that the White House was built by slaves. There was a controversy. O'Reilly said that they were well fed. Exactly. But the same sort of arguments are said by religious groups as well, religious Muslims as well. Raza Aslan, for example, said, if you know anything about Muhammad, you know that he abolished slavery. So the same sort of apologism and the same sort of motivations, I guess, exist within Muslim communities as well. Okay. So the Islamic model of slavery is similarly divinely ordained, and there are verses in the Quran that talk about the fact that you need to view God, it's an admonition to people that do not believe in God, that they put other people equal to God, and when they are slaves of God, would you want your slaves to be equal to you? It's explicitly acknowledging the fact that there's a certain hierarchy within the Islamic conception of the world. I'll end it up there and pass it on to Maryam.
Thank you, Muhammad. Thank you, Muhammad. Our final speaker, final panelist is Mariam Namazi, who will give a presentation. Maryam is an Iranian-born white man activist. She's the she's a spokesperson for Fitna, Movement for Women's Liberation, One Law for All, and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. She hosts a weekly television program in Persian and English called Bread and Roses. She's on the International Advisory Board of the Raif Badawi Foundation for Freedom, Euromind and Feminist Dissent, Honorary Associate of Rationalist International and National Secular Society, patron of London Black Atheists and Pink Triangle Trust, a Humanist Laureate at the International Academy of Humanism, and a columnist for Freethinker. Please welcome Mariam Namazi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to see you all. Okay, so I'm going to try to put a timer so I don't talk too long. No, okay. Switch this one on? Yeah, it'll be easier. Do you mind?
Yeah, you can use this.
Oh, yeah, that's much easier. Okay. Okay, I'll just leave this here. I'm going to fall now. Okay. So, thank you. I wanted to talk a bit about the issue of equality and women's rights in Islam. And I want to start with my lovely family in Iran. You know, my family is Muslim, and our family was such where we had some people who used to fast during Ramadan, some who didn't, some who were veiled, some who didn't. And it was all very cozy and relaxed and very lovely until the Islamists took over the Iranian revolution, which, by the way, was not an Islamic revolution. It was a left-leaning revolution against the Shah's dictatorship. And they took it over, they expropriated it, they slaughtered an entire generation in that country. And we see what we see today. So it was only then, when they took over, that I realized how much Islam hates women. And I realized that particularly because when I went to, I can't see my slide, so I'm just going to go ahead by accident. Is there any way to do that?
To move on?
No, to see the little one. Yeah, don't worry, it's okay. So anyway, the only time I realized, yeah, no, it's fine, just leave it, it's okay. I realized was when the Hezbollah, which are like the Iranian Islamists, we call them Hezbollah, which means party of God, those who represent God, you know, they're there to do God's work for him. They came to my school, which was a mixed school, and they started segregating boys and girls. And I was 12 at the time. And the fact was that they thought that there would be some untoward sexual relations if they don't separate us. I mean, we were kids. And that just shows, you know, they're so perverse. Their view of women, of men, of even children is so perverse. And the fact that they had to segregate us, and they said that it's because we're, you know, girls, we're the source of fitna in society, and if we're not segregated, all hell will break loose. As is obvious in this room, you know, hell is breaking loose because some of us are here and we're not veiled. It was then that I really realized what Islam thinks about women and what the Islamists think about women. And of course, there are lots of things in Islam that refer to this status of women. For example, Muhammad, Islam's prophet, has said, I've left no greater fitna or calamity for men than women. And of course, you've got lots of surahs in the Quran as well, like this one, which permits the beating of women who are disobedient. And I want to just give you an example of how this affects people who live under these rules. You know, here's really, these are like kindergarten kids. And they're in a musical group. And here there's a photo of them, of their musical group. And of course, the Iranian regime censors thought this was causing fitna. There's going to be sex now. So the organizers had to change it. And what they did is they put scarves on the girls. But it was still not good enough for them because the girls' arms were showing. And wait a second, there's some girls sitting in the front row. So, and this is the final picture. And again, it's, you know, it is perverse. It's a perverse view of women, of girls, and also of boys and men. It gives the idea that men are unable to control their sexual urges. And it sexualizes girls at a very young age. It holds them responsible for male sexual feelings, you know. And it's just, there's so many examples of this. I mean, I can't go into it, but you know, there was a law in Iran where it allowed men to marry their adopted stepdaughters because he'd want to have sex with her, and isn't it better that they're married so that it would be halal? You know, it's just this idea is so perverse when you think about it, and so many of the rules are based on these sort of perversions. And of course, it's not just Islam. Let me be clear. There's a Jewish prayer that says, you know, blessed are you, Lord, that men say, that you didn't create me a woman. And in the Bible, there are many, many verses, including this one where it says a woman should learn in quietness and full submission. you know, there's this wonderful feminist, Elizabeth Stanton, who said every form of religion which has breathed upon this earth has degraded women. And I agree with that statement. So it's not just Islam. But I think with Islam, because it is in political power and its rules are the rules of many states, and also, you know, you've got Sharia courts in Britain, for example, so it's affecting the lives of a lot of people, which is why it's of such great concern. You know, I think when you look at Islamic rules, it is very often, a lot of it is focused on trying to make women invisible in society. And there's this wonderful artist, Philip Toledano, and he's done a series which is called the, God, what's it called? I've forgotten the word. Portraits of Absence, that's it. He's created a series called The Portraits of Absence, and it's based on actual merchandise that's sold in Iran. And I remember seeing this, you know, magazines with women's bodies blacked out, and you know, these are just things people, you know, oh my gosh, there was a woman there, so we got to black her out. And it goes, again, practically what happens is this attempt to constantly arrest and harass women who are improperly veiled. So in Iran, even though it's compulsory, it's arresting women and harassing them, and girls as well, who are improperly veiled. And if you look at the chador even, or the burqa and niqab, it is this sort of fabric erasure of women from the public space. You know, so in Iran there's this big problem. There's one of the regime's guards, they're the Gasht Zahra, and harassing women who they think, oh, you're not properly veiled, you know. And there's lots of sinister publicity around veiling as well, even in countries where it's not compulsory. So, you know, if you're not veiled, you're a sweet ready to be eaten by flies. You know, here there's a picture of a baby, for goodness sake, you know, saying that the hijab protects your child. And this one's great. It says, you know, have you ever seen an onion that has a worm in it? No, because onions have several layers of chador around it. But the potato, it's got such a weak skin. And then in the end it says, sisters, be an onion. Be an onion, yeah? And of course, here's a great cartoon where, you know, there's the regime stealing loads of money and going to Canada. I don't know why Canada, but that's where they're going. There's a woman running away from someone throwing acid. There's the police beating someone with a freedom banner. There's public hangings in Iran. And of course, when the river runs dry, it's because of a woman's hair showing from her hijab. And that's exactly what they say all the time. And of course, there's these sort of images, you know where Sarah and I are going. They've already warned us, which is great. You know, I always say I much prefer to be in hell than to be in heaven, where, you know, Islamists are raping 72 virgins. You know, it's like, no, thank you. I definitely, sorry? Said that all the interesting people were there. Exactly, yes, exactly. And of course, when we look at the, oh my gosh, it's already 8 minutes. When we look at the concept of Sharia law as well, it is this focus on women, you know, and particularly when you're looking at the family code. It's about restricting women, and very much linked to the veil, to gender segregation. It targets women. And I think one of the things is that there is this contradiction, because we often see how Islam and Islamic states and the religious right in general, you know, they try to keep women out of the public space. On the other hand, women are everywhere, you know. They're very vocal, they're seen, they're heard, they refuse to be silenced. And I think sometimes when people see this and they're looking at the surface, they say, well, you know, Islamic states aren't so bad. Look how women are in the public space, and so on and so forth. And I think this is a contradiction that if you look on the surface, you might see it that way, but it's thanks to women's resistance and not thanks to Islam or Islamic reformers, as they call it. that women are in that situation. And this is a great cartoon showing the women's liberation movement puncturing the tires of one of the Hezbollah in Iran. Again, a lot of people will say, oh, it's the moderates. You know, in Iran, it's the moderate Rouhani or Khatami who's helping to change things for women. And in fact, nothing's really changed. I mean, reform has real meaning in the real world. It means changes in the law. It means changes in public policy. You can't still have stoning to deaths and have hanging and arrest women for improper veiling and then say that it's reformed, you know. So, and there's also, of course, Islamic feminists like Shirin Ebadi who'll talk about how Islam respects women's rights. And again, I think, you know, it's an oxymoron, if I'm completely honest. Islam and feminism, Christianity and feminism, Judaism and feminism. No religion is liberatory towards women. No religion empowers women. And so if we do see the sort of women everywhere, including many Muslim women, it's because of their own resistance, not because of Islam or Islamism. And I just want to show you a couple of slides of this resistance. This is the unveiling movement in Iran. And here's an unveiled woman standing in front of a banner which says, "Sisters, respect your Islamic hijab." And there are lots of these sort of pictures. I'm sure you've heard of the stealthy freedoms. It's become quite well known now. And these are men veiling in support of women, saying, well, how come women have to be veiled? Why not men? You know, so they've taken their wives or girlfriends or whatever friends' veils and they're wearing it. Here's a picture of a woman with a no forced hijab sign. And it's in a rally that's organized by the Iranian regime. So it's very, very courageous, I think. And again, it just shows how much resistance exists there. And of course, you must have all seen this, you know, people reaching liberated areas outside of ISIS's control and removing that black veil and the color underneath. And this is an amazing photo. These are people who've got into liberated areas that are run by Kurdish forces. And what do you see strewn along the road? But it's the black burqas that they were forced to wear. And this is a gorgeous photo of a Kurdish fighter pulling down a sign that ISIS had put up telling women how to dress. And I also need to add that in Rojava, Sharia courts have been banned, compulsory veiling's been banned, polygamy's been banned. You know, so again, a lot of these people are also Muslims. So it's not about being anti-Muslim, but the fact that lots of Muslims as well are secularists, are feminists. I don't think Islam can be secularist or feminist, but people can, believers can. And of course, there are other forms of resistance like nude protest. This is Alia Majd al-Mahdi at a conference in defense of the veil saying hijab is sexism, not anti-racism. This is an action we held in Paris as well in defense of women's liberation. You've got Muslim women in India who are against the triple talaq rule. You've got Muslim women opposed to polygamy. You've got Muslim women and others, secularists, atheists, who are against male guardianship rules, against Sharia courts, against gender segregation. And of course, you've got ex-Muslims speaking up about why they've become ex-Muslims. This is a great one. So I'm just running to this is a demonstration in Afghanistan, and the sign says the dirty hands of the merchants of religion off our country, so that there are no more Farkhondes or Rukhshanas. Those are two people who were killed. This is again in Afghanistan. These are women who are commemorating people slaughtered and buried in mass graves in Iran, in Khavaran. This is our rally at Pride in London this year. The police tried to stop us, saying Allah is gay has offended people. And we said, well, why don't you go and collect all the ones that say Jesus is gay, and then come and collect ours. We're not giving ours up. And of course, we had lots of support, but we also had a complaint by the East London Mosque, which is a center of Islamophobia, homophobia, no, we're the Islamophobes, according to them. But the East London Mosque is run by Jamaat-e-Islami, which is like the Salafis of South Asia. And they have complained, and Pride has said that they're going to see whether they're going to let us back next year. So again, this idea that, you know, the community is homogenous, and people like the East London Mosque represent Muslims, and we're the ones who are homophobic, and so on and so forth. You've got a journalist calling us, saying that we're similar to Nazis and white supremacists. And again, I didn't really see any Nazis or white supremacists at Gay Pride. I don't think they're really pro-LGBT rights. And Jesus and Mo has done a cartoon. I'm just running through these. So I just wanted to show you pictures of this sort of resistance, say that it's not thanks to Islam, it's in resistance to it, in the same way that lots of the women's liberation movements throughout history has been mainly vis-a-vis the church, vis-a-vis Judaism. It's been against religion, because religion is one of the best ways that exist to control and restrict women's rights. So I think it's important, you know, when we challenge, when we want to defend women's rights, we do have to challenge religion and the religious right. You can't defend religion and also say that you're a defender of women's rights. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Maryam. So now we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. Wanted to first bring up the gender disparity issues. I think we mentioned already there's sexism even in, you know, the treatment of ex-Muslims, but we have kind of broadly differences. Say even coming down to marriage, who you can marry. There's men can marry, you know, Jews and Christians, whereas Muslim women only can marry Muslim men. I heard an apologist say that this is because women are, you know, the bearers of the men are the bearers of the religion, and women, you know, are submissive to the men. And if it was the other way around, it'd be okay. What would you say to that?
It goes back to the same thing. Women are second-class citizens, and men are control, piety, and submission. Mm-hmm. And similar to the children aspect, children belong to the father, and the father is responsible for their religious upbringing. The concern over there is that if a woman is married to a Christian man, then the kids will be subservient to that Christian man and will become Christian. The focus is on increasing the piety of the Muslim tribe and keeping it faithful. So women are viewed as incapable of doing that because they do not have retained quote-unquote ownership over children.
And women also get half the inheritance of a man. So, yeah.
We can go on for a long time on the ways women are second-class citizens. They get half the inheritance. They do not get rights to children, period. So after, I'm from the Virginia, D.C. area, and over there, the law is largely based upon the fact that who takes care of the children. And even the financial division is based upon who earns more. It's pretty egalitarian. From an Islamic concept, that doesn't matter. The children belong to the father. So Islam does acknowledge that young children need a mother more. So until a certain age, the mother is allowed to be with the kids. But after that age, I think it's around 7, automatically the kids revert to the father. And you see this across the Muslim world. In most Muslim countries, the law is shaped based on those religious edicts.
Okay, well, what would you say though to if someone says, well, in certain countries they're not? I mean, let's say I'm a scholar of religion, and I keep telling you that I'm a scholar of religion a lot, and I have a short-lived show on CNN or something like that, and I tell you that, you know, in Indonesia and Malaysia, women are 100% equal to men. Would any of you comment on that?
I would call you a liar. That's not the case. So particularly in Malaysia, all of these laws exist specifically from an Islamic context. Women are second class in exactly the same ways that you would find within Islam. The only distinction is those laws are only apply to Muslims. So if you're a non-Muslim, those laws won't apply to you. But since you're not allowed to leave Islam, as a Muslim, you have no way out of those laws.
Did you have a comment?
I mean,
You took the mic off.
yeah, I have to turn my mic back on. Yeah, but I think what I really liked was Muhammad bringing up in his talk the fact that the women's inequality is even seen in the term in ways that they treat apostates, which is to say that we as women wouldn't get the death penalty, but he would. And the idea behind that is that even we're not even mentally stable and capable enough to hold those ideas on our own, that we can be forgiven in a way that somebody with responsibility and a sense of mind, the way that a man has, can be held responsible. So I think there's the inequality is just pervasive throughout the religion, and it wouldn't be wrong to call it a gendered religion. That is to say, the ways to be a good Muslim as a man and the ways to be a good Muslim as a woman are very different, starkly different, and that's due to this acknowledgement that men and women are different beings, and that Islamic law, Sharia, should reflect that on earth.
What you mentioned about not being able to leave the religion as well, or the laws. I mean, this is something else I hear a lot, like that Islamic law only applies to Muslims. But for that, the state should, first of all, know who is and who isn't a Muslim, which would kind of require like a Muslim registry or something like that.
In every Muslim country it exists. Your birth certificate indicates whether you're a Muslim or not. Your passport indicates that, and you're not allowed to change that. So I'm from Pakistan. In the forms, you can change your religion from Muslim, like if you're filling it out online, to Christian. From Christian to Muslim, in the sense that you can convert to Islam. But the option is grayed out if you want to do it the other way. That option does not exist.
Wow, okay. It would also seem, though, that there would be some basic disadvantages to being non-Muslim, right? I mean, otherwise everyone would at least classify themselves as non-Muslim, and, if there were any legal distinction otherwise, right? Why would someone deliberately push themselves into a harsher law, for example?
So in a modern context, you're already grandfathered into it. You have no way out. Back in the day, there were benefits in the sense of if you were a Christian, you had to pay a different high tax rate, which was basically about submission to the state as a second-class citizen. So back in the day, there was incentive to convert to Islam to avoid that high taxation rate. And you saw that after being conquered, over time, people would slowly but surely convert into Islam to prevent those secondary negative consequences.
And some of them were pretty. What was that about mounting horses? The people who was that?
There are a lot of arcane little things about how non-Muslims around Muslims need to indicate their inferior status, and one of them was you can't ride it with legs on both sides. I don't know what it's called, saddle, or if you're a non-Muslim, you have to.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact ones, but there were lots of specific laws about the ways in which.
If you're walking on a sidewalk and a Muslim is walking on the other side, you have to get off the sidewalk and let them pass first, as a non-Muslim. This, at least, I don't see around the world anymore. But in early Islamic history, this was a thing.
Along with different colored clothes for Jews, I believe that was also a thing earlier on.
There's a Pact of Umar. I believe it's called, where it's mentioned. I haven't read how widespread the practice itself was, but it is mentioned in this document.
Maryam, regarding LGBT rights, now you're obviously an LGBT rights activist, and you seem to be caught between this, on one hand supporting LGBT rights, on the other hand being considered an Islamophobe, and there are LGBT people who have come out against you on that account for some reason. So what would you comment on that, like in terms of this seemingly between a rock and a hard place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is, I think it's something we've all experienced, where you are immediately labeled an Islamophobe, someone who's trying to incite hatred against Muslims, incite discrimination, and the reality is that you're defending people's rights, and I think the reason behind it is that something we talked about as well, we talked about in our talks, was this idea of identity politics and multiculturalism as a social policy, where it doesn't see citizens anymore, it doesn't see human beings anymore with human rights, but it sees communities only. And therefore, you know, you belong to one tribe and one community, and any criticism of a belief is seen as an attack on an entire community. But it's not, because as I was trying to show, there are lots of gay Muslims who want their human rights as well. There are lots of women who don't want to go to Sharia courts, and they might be believers as well. And I think this is, you know, what this sort of identity politics has done is it's removed the idea of universal rights, it's removed the idea of citizenship, and it's made people extensions of a community. So you've just got to manage, you've got to just deal with whatever inequality exists. And I guess my question is, why is it inciting hatred if you defend the rights of LGBT, or if you defend the rights of women, you know, or if you defend the rights of ex-Muslims? Why is it hatred against Muslims? Why? Why? To say that there are people who don't want to believe anymore, and they have a right not to believe anymore, and they have a right to criticize if they don't want to. How is that an attack on Muslims? And I think we need to move away from that. You know, this is something I always tell Muslims as well. Look, if we have space to breathe, you will have more space to breathe as well. Because the reality is that if you can't only defend the right to religion, you have to also defend the right to be free from religion. They are linked with each other. And that's why we see, for example, in Pakistan, so many Muslims are facing persecution on blasphemy laws. It's not just us horrible apostates who drew a cartoon of Muhammad or said something awful about Islam. It affects everybody, and that's why it's important to have that space, you know. And okay, we are the scapegoats and the, you know, people that everyone likes to kick, and that's fine, because, but if we're honest, we are opening a space up for Muslims as well, Muslims who dissent, Muslims who want to question and still be Muslims. You know, the problem is with this idea of identity politics, there's only one sort of Muslim that's acceptable, and it's always, you know, the authentic Muslim is the Islamist. And if you're not, you're never Muslim enough. They, you know, I'm working in Britain with lots of Muslim women against Sharia courts and against child veiling. For example, 4-year-old children are being veiled in Islamic schools. And the Islamists tell the Muslim women, you're not really Muslim women. And of course, we're not even ex-Muslims, because Shias weren't Muslims anyway. There's always, you know, when they're counting Muslims, everybody's a Muslim. You know, there are so many Muslims in the world, and we're growing. But if you become an ex-Muslim, you were never a real Muslim. But you were counting me in your statistics before. So can you please, you know, and again, it's this idea that it's homogenous, we're not allowed to think, we're not allowed to question. Why not?
Yeah, and you've spoken about, you touched upon Sharia just now, and you have touched upon it as well. Let's say I were to say, well, you know, in a famous tweet, I don't drink alcohol, I don't drink pork, I don't eat pork, and that's Sharia. Or, you know you're living in Sharia if credit cards are interest free. Let's say, you know, you do that, and you do a women's march or something like that. And what would you say to that?
So in particular regarding the interest thing, anybody that has studied even a bit of economics knows that without credit, our economic systems don't work. The reason Europe expanded so quickly back in the day was because of credit, because of corporations and them being able to get credit and create enterprise. So that alone is enough to show why the Muslim world is backwards economically. If you don't have credit, you lose a million opportunities to grow your businesses, grow economic activity. So that tweet is more showing.
Yeah. But specifically that Sharia law is limited to that. Like that's as much, you know, public imposition as it gets. It's just, and the rest of it is just, you know, personal observances like sartorial choices and dietary choices.
Right. There's definitely a sense in which the impositions of the divine law whitewashed a little bit in order to make them seem less dangerous, less scary to the average, American. And again, I think this comes from not that terrible of a place in the sense that there is a lot of fear mongering when it comes to, Sharia law is like it's right around the corner, but it isn't right around the corner.
We had an Act for America rally just like early this year, I think, actually. Act for America, Pamela Geller and everyone came. I mean, I don't think she came over, but there was an Act for America rally against Sharia in Boston, and it was just amazing because it was like basically these, on one side you have these, people ranting about Sharia and apparently okay with like Christian Sharia. And on the other side you have like Muslims who are basically being apologists for Sharia and whitewashing it, as you said.
Right. Well, I mean, just because the fear-mongering exists doesn't also mean that there isn't a problem there, and a real serious one, and one that we have to be honest about. But when it comes to, I actually wanted to add a little bit to what Mariam said earlier, not to like shift the conversation back to where it was, but what you said was why, what's wrong with just accepting us and allowing us to speak. I was reading this. I mean, it was just some blog somewhere of this conservative Muslim who was defending the death penalty for apostates, and he was like, well, here's the case. And I think his reasoning shows why it's really important to talk about why not only is the religion harmful, that it's false, that it's literally not true. Because his argument was, well, you have these apostates, and they're talking about, they're criticizing the faith, and they're creating doubt among the believers, and then people have to, and then people are leaving the faith. And what we're really risking here is our neighbors and our communities and our friends burning in hellfire forever. And that's what these apostates want, and that's where it will go if they get their way. And if we love our neighbors, if we love our nation and our communities, we don't want them to burn forever in hellfire. And so it's actually quite, it's a good thing. It's a compassionate thing to kill the apostate now, so that eternity, good people aren't burning forever. And I think this is why it's really important to always talk about literally why is this not even true. Not just that it's harmful, but that it's not true, because they can always, within their understanding of the way that the world is, they can always reformulate these variety of abuses as actually good in the long run, and heaven and hell are a good way of doing that.
Can I just add a few things on the issue of Sharia? You mentioned how it's often promoted as something that's trivial and personal observances. And it's interesting because actually, when you look at Sharia courts, for example, in Britain, it focuses on restricting women's rights in the family. So, women have limited rights to divorce. Men have unilateral right to divorce by saying talaq 3 times. Women have very limited rights to child custody. Muhammad talked about it. It's until a preset age. Then, irrespective of the welfare of the child, it goes to the father. Inheritance is half of what men would get. And also, domestic violence, for example, is often seen to be the prerogative of the husband. There's lots of evidence of these Sharia courts saying it. Or marital rape is not rape. And one of the Sharia judges has said, to call marital rape is the act of aggression, not the actual marital rape. Because in marriage, there's no such thing as rape. And, so you're seeing this all the time. And what's interesting is, again, the fact that these issues are considered trivial is because of the cultural relativism that sees women as extensions of their communities, and therefore this is community business. Stay out of it. It's trivial. We're managing our women. Thank you very much. And again, the racism behind that is obvious. Because a white woman would have a right to divorce. She would have right to be free from domestic violence. And then you've got minority women in countries where these laws exist, fought for thanks to the women's liberation movement, not thanks to the states who are governing, but thanks for hard-fought rights. People have actually died for these rights. They don't apply to minority women because that's their culture, And again,
the sort of bigotry of low expectations.
It is, definitely. And the other issue I wanted to just talk about is this idea of, you talked about Act for America. I think this is very important that we talk about the far right and racism and xenophobia, because this is one of the reasons why very many good people don't want to have these discussions. And honestly, sometimes I don't blame them, because there is so much racism and so much abuse and so much hate against Muslims, and not just Muslims. I mean, they can't tell a Sikh from a Muslim. This poor Sikh guy got killed because we all look the same to them. Our parents get abused when they walk down the street. And racists really can't tell many of us apart. So, the whole defense of Muslim profiling, for example, Iran has one of the largest anti-Islamic backlashes in the world, and yet Iran is on the list because of a regime that most people hate. So again, none of this makes sense because you're seeing people as homogenous.
Wouldn't you say though that the common thread here is ignorance, right? Because on one hand you have all these bigots who just make repeat talking points from the far right and the Jihad Watch and so on, and on the other hand you have people who just kind of swallow whole the apologetics that Sharia law is just personal observance, and you must have seen the tweet that apostasy, death for apostasy, is not part of Islam, and this is not part of Islam, and that's so. Isn't this like a great opportunity for ex-Muslims to kind of insert themselves in this and maybe educate people in general about before the bigots and the apologists get to them?
But I mean, I think if you don't speak, then you leave the space for the bigots and the apologists, and we have a responsibility to do it. And what's interesting is, whilst they won't agree, the bigots and apologists are looking at Muslims in the same way. They're looking at them as a homogeneous bunch. One, defending them, and by doing that, defending the Islamists, because they're seen to be the authentic representatives. And the far right sees us all as barbaric savages. None of us are worthy of ever living in the West, and we're coming to destroy culture. Well, thanks to us, we're fighting for enlightenment values that none of the far right are actually. They're destroying those values. But I wanted to just add this, and I think it's important that we fight on many fronts as well. And why do we feel that we can't fight on several fronts at the same time? So fight racism, but also fight apostasy and blasphemy laws.
Mohammed, the other comment?
A couple of them. I think it's far more insidious than that. It's that people don't want to accept the truth. They know what the reality of the situation is, but for narrative purposes, for political purposes, they're perfectly happy to lie. If the same concept was applied to somebody defending Christian thought or Christian theocracy, the example I gave about slavery, instinctively everybody laughed. Everybody understands how ridiculous it is. But when the same conversation happens around Islam, nobody speaks about it. I had mentioned that Raza Aslan said that Muhammad banned slavery, even though the Arab slave trade, the Islamic slave trade, was worse than the Atlantic in number, in scope, in time, and there was no reaction to that. Imagine a Christian professor in America talking about slavery, that it never existed or was abolished 2,000 years ago or whatever. What would be the backlash? He suffered no consequence of that. People understand that it is not true, but they don't care.
Can I just make a quick comment, though? I think I agree with you 100%, but I think, again, this goes back to this view of homogenization. It's, I was giving Sarah two examples of when I went to speak at a university against Sharia law, and this Muslim woman was saying, that's not true, Sharia is not like that. And then afterwards she came and told me, I agreed with most of what you said, and they wanted to take me to a Sharia court, and I refused. And I thought, well, why are you defending it in public? But again, it goes back to this idea that we belong to this group and this tribe, and we have to defend it, even if we have to lie about it. And we see many examples of that. So I think it's linked to that homogenization as well.
And actually, I would call it a dehumanization from both sides. That's what I would say, because if you are, perfectly, if you're only capable of, what did you call it, the barbaric savagery, right? If you're only capable of being this barbaric savage or being a noble savage, then you are truly you're not human, and you're not complicated and capable of growth and progress and change in the way that in the way that a citizen of the West is, or somebody who comes from a non-Muslim background. So there's a sense in which from both extremes, I feel that there's a dehumanization of Muslims too, even from the left, when they say that, okay, we're here to protect them against bigotry. But if you're going to do that by being dishonest, then you're really making it more difficult for people from Muslim backgrounds to change, to move their communities forward, for people who are reformists to advocate for positive change, because what happens is that they get labeled an apostate. And this is where the apostate stigma becomes such a wide problem. It's not as if just there's a tiny percentage of individuals who are being targeted by this. Well, in fact, there's many of us. I think there's many ex-Muslims all over the world. But the fact that that label is always there and can always smear anyone, even those who are actually not ex-Muslims, who just may be dissenting Muslims, or Muslims who feel like, we need to give away this part of the Quran, or that practice should no longer be something we participate in. They can also be called an apostate, and once they are labeled that way, then their lives are in danger, their families are in danger, and it's not worth it. It's not worth to risk that label being branded that way. So you just stay out of the realm of criticizing the religion altogether, or anything that could offend religious sensibilities altogether. So I think there's a broad censoring effect that takes place when people like us are demonized in such a way. Apostates are demonized in such a way. And
also kind of tokenism, right? Because for example, there's a comedian who, anytime someone tells him about the status of gay people, for example, in Islam, he trots out this one gay imam somewhere in New York, and DC. It seems like these cases seem to prove the rule, but does that really exonerate the religion itself, though?
So if in America, gay rights is a relatively recent thing, the civil rights thing, how often do we question whether Christianity had anything to do with it? If a Christian scholar said that there's this one preacher that is gay, how much credibility would that person have? But again, Razastan can say this, or I think you're talking about Dino Pidela, could say this, and there's no consequence to them. They're not ridiculed. They don't suffer for saying outrageously stupid things.
Well, although some people just say, and like Christian apologists might as well say, that people just insert their values into religion. You must have heard this line a few times.
So then why have religion is my question. Why have the ideology to begin with if it's only ever a reflection of who you are already? And this is something, many people may not be familiar with this, but it's kind of getting somewhat popularized, with this kind of postmodernist view of religion as something that really in itself doesn't say anything, and the text is just a text, and texts are infinitely malleable, and you can just interpret them in 1,000 different ways. So really what we're seeing is a reflection of the values and norms you already have. But beyond being obviously incorrect, and again, ex-Muslims are proof of this, because I know people who were homophobic, and then they left the religion, and they were like, well, there's no reason for me to be that way anymore. In fact, you see it in nature, and also discarded that homophobia. I know people who've started to examine misogyny, they may hold, or sexist attitudes, men and women, after leaving the faith, and the reason they were able to examine it and let them go was because there was nothing holding them to those, that homophobia, to that sexism in the first place. So I think ex-Muslims are proof, first of all, that you do change after leaving the faith. There is something there. I think it's one of those things that's obvious to most people, so I shouldn't need to discuss it too much. But there is something really terrible about what that idea really means when it comes to the Muslim world. So if you're saying that really it's just a reflection of their internal moral compass, then you are throwing the entire Muslim world under the bus as people who are just inherently bad or more likely to hold, you know, illiberal values than people from the Western world, because it's just a reflection of who you happen to be. So there's something really disgusting about that, and I think we need to examine those kinds of apologisms when we confront them, and what they'll actually mean if we you know, take them at their word.
I would say that is anti-Muslim bigotry. The idea that these people are inherently that way. And a lot of Muslims themselves are anti-Muslim bigots because they're using Muslims to shield the religion. So regarding that same thing, Muslims are inherently evil or inherently bad or inherently whatever because it's a reflection of who they are, and the religion has nothing to do with that. So you're defending the religion by demonizing these people, and Muslims themselves do this.
You mentioned the Ahmadi, and just wanted to get a sense of like why this group that is so persecuted just for violating the finality doctrine, why they seem to be almost the biggest apologists for Islam.
They have the exact same motivations as every other Muslim. They want their Islam to be wonderful. The other side of it is they hope to convert people to their version of Islam. So if we come across as the hippies of Islam, maybe more Sunnis and Shias will convert to it. The persecution side doesn't factor into the evangelism side.
Would you not say though that maybe would this not be a good thing though? I mean, okay, apart from you being an ex-Muslim, let's say you were not an ex-Muslim, but just like just never been Muslim, wouldn't you prefer that more people listen to the Ahmadis in that sense?
Why would I prefer people to embrace another falsehood after leaving one falsehood? Like both are false. They're false in slightly different ways. They're saying that instead of Catholics, we should be promoting Mormonism. It would make the world a better place. It's
good one, yeah. All right. So I think we'll open it up to questions from the audience. We have a mic over there, and I'll put this mic over here, and people can come to either side and ask questions.
If you have any. Okay, you can we just have to
if you
make sure
guys
we
can
get
queue up over there.
I'm sorry, I think your keys fell right there.
And one question each. If you have multiple questions, you can go to the back of the line and ask another question.
Oh yeah, I just want to make the terms of this clear. So this is a platform for our guests, and it's not a place to make comments. So please keep it a question first of all, and keep it concise and to the point. Thank you.
It's not on. There's a switch at the top. Yeah.
H.G. Wells had a great quote for this type of situation. He said, "History is a race between education and catastrophe." And so, what I see is in the world today is most people are ignorant, incredibly ignorant. And what I heard you say, Maryam, about Iran, the revolution started from the left side, then it got taken over. Later on, it became Islamicized, where there was a left wing, and this is what happens. This is what I see is happening here. The Antifa, whoever they are, I've never seen anything like that. I see the Muslim Brotherhood, or whoever you want to call the fifth column in this country, working the agenda for Muslimization of the country. You see it all the time, and it's sad because I want to just say to you people that I love ex-Muslims. So I don't want you to think that every person's always an ex-Muslim. I got away from stereotyping a long time ago. When you get to know a person face to face, you don't have any kinds of religions or races or anything like that. And I want to thank you for coming here. I'm confused, I have a lot of questions, but I want to thank you for coming here just to straighten out some things, because do you think there's hope? The biggest problem I see is that half a billion women are suffocated at birth to learn only a certain way of living. Do you think there's hope for women? I was shocked. I didn't think the women could actually leave their houses without a man. I didn't know that. When you said, I saw all those people marching in Afghanistan. Is there hope for women long term? Is there real hope, or is it going to be crushed like it was in the Maldive Islands a few years ago? They voted democracy, but the Muslims insidiously came again, and now it's even worse.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Well, I will say one thing, just it's not really answering the question necessarily, but that when it comes to the status of women, this is something agreed upon by many Muslim women. Some they're dissenters and they speak out, but there's a loud voice of conservative Muslim women who will agree with this and who will apologize for it, in fact. And if you look at even feminist history, you will see all the women that wanted to, you know, get a right to vote, and you will see that there were women on the other side of that platform as well, and they were often elevated as voices on the opposing side. So I think that this provides a little bit of confusion when people in the West are wanting to discuss, you know, what's the status of women in these cultures, because here you have a hijabi woman that's saying, oh no, I'm so empowered by this religion, and why wouldn't I say that? I am a woman, and this gives me this credibility to talk about this. So I think it can be confusing at times, but one thing we have to do is to convince the women themselves, right? It's not as if they're just being like forcibly tied down all the time. Sometimes that is the case, but sometimes they agree with it because they think, okay, this is what God actually wants, and maybe this is what He wants from me. Maybe there's so much of this I don't understand. I'm only a human, and there's ways of rationalizing it too. So part of it has to be that we have to have these conversations with Muslims and with Muslim women and get them to acknowledge that for themselves. Because when I was a Muslim, I know that I actually believed this was an empowering religion for me. I actually thought that that I was empowered by the faith, that it did respect me in a way that nothing else could, and in the way that the Western world does not respect their women. So, you know, I would have been somebody who would have been apologizing for the faith, who would have been talking about it because I felt that I was empowered by it. And what changed my mind were people presenting really good arguments about why that's not the case, and they changed my mind, and they gave me that inner strength and that willingness to fight back, because you're also going to have you also have a percentage of women who do agree with Islamic law.
Because they don't want to think. They want to let the Quran do the thinking for them. You gotta.
Well, some of that, it's not about wanting to think. It's just that it's never occurred to you that your parents would lie to you, that your community would do something terrible for you. It's one of those things that just needs to be, you know, it needs to enter into, you know, I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but if you live under this, yeah, if you're under this, in this bubble, and everything around you and everyone you love and everyone you care about is telling you about how this is such a wonderful, empowering thing, and the way to have this perfect, good life is to look further into religious texts, then you are, I mean, obviously you're biased to go in that direction. So I think we need to have these conversations, and we need to have them with Muslims.
Can I just add a few things? I mean, I think there is a lot of hope. I think there's a lot of resistance and dissent, of course. Just like people internalized racial apartheid in South Africa, there were some who defended the Bantustans and separate rule and saying separate but equal. There were many who didn't accept it and who dissented and who refused and resisted. It's the same in this situation. There are women who will internalize this, there are others who will resist. And I think it's not so much about saying Muslim women think X and Y, it's about people's politics and choices. You have men who can be feminists, women who can be misogynists. It's not just about your identity, it's about where you stand in your politics. And I think it's important to not see people as one whole, because they're individuals, just like there are individuals in this room with different opinions. If I can be frank though, I really despise words like fifth column or Muslimization of the country, and I think that is the sort of language of the far right that gives this impression that there is this teeming horde of savages trying to get into the West, to change the West and destroy it from the inside. And I guess actually the point I was trying to make was that people are individuals. There are people who are secularists, who have never traveled in their world, who've never traveled anywhere outside of their village in Iran, but who are atheists. People who are free thinkers, people who defend women's rights, though they live and were born in a theocracy. In Iran, 70% of the population is under 30. They've never seen anything but an Islamic regime, but the regime constantly talks about this threat of secularism and atheism in that country. So don't look at people as this homogenous group. I think that's part of the problem. The left do it, the far right do it, and here everyone, you know, people are scapegoated, they're dehumanized, as Sarah mentioned, and you don't see people for what they are. It's the same with the refugee issue. I mean, refugees are people who are fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing for a better life. I myself was a refugee, you know. To just assume that they're people who are coming to blow up America or whatever, they need to be profiled, and X, Y, and Z is part of the problem, I think. And we need to be able to see allies amongst those who we consider the enemy. They're not, in many instances.
To add one more thing to that, the issue is more that ascribing a larger movement to where none exists. So Muslims are trying to fight for their religion because they view it as perfect and good, and they want to have certain privileges and rights based upon that religion. You don't need a larger conspiracy for that. It's that I love my religion and I want X, Y, and Z for my religion. If you look at America, currently right now in the Senate and House, with the tax bill, there's an amendment called the Johnson Amendment, which separates church and state, which prevents churches from interfering in politics. And they're trying to repeal that right now as a part of the tax law. And that is Christians encroaching on the government. It's the exact same sort of fifth column type thing. You can look at it, but from their perspective, what they're simply trying to do is trying to make the country reflect their values, which are religious values. So Muslims are doing the exact same thing. It's not anything nefarious beyond the fact that they believe theocracy and religious values are good values.
The church and the mosque are the same. Separation of church.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same concept.
And the state. I think that's what it should be. But
yeah.
I see
But religious people generally don't like that.
Can we move on to the question from this side?
Thank you.
You can hold the mic if you prefer.
I think this is so first of all, I want to thank you for coming and speaking your truth. I'm a grad student. I study Islam and Islamic extremism and groups like ISIS. And really, the one thing that I think that you guys, what you're saying, the points you're making, and what ISIS would agree on is your understanding of Islam. Because what you seem to be doing really is sort of taking one, you refuse to sort of accept that your understanding of Islam is a kind of interpretation of Islam, which is one of the things that these kinds of groups do, and then you sort of take you take up the most extremist versions and elements of that, and then present that to people as, oh, this is Islam, this is Islam, right? And I very much sympathize with the traumas you've endured, which of course is real pain and suffering. My question to you, too, is, you know, there's no way for someone who comes into this kind of a gathering, who doesn't have a previous exposure to Islam, to walk out of this place wanting to really, I wouldn't want a Muslim neighbor, I wouldn't want to work with a Muslim after hearing the kinds of things that you're sort of saying about Muslims, which, by the way, as a scholar of Islam, I completely disagree with. If I had 30 minutes, I would point kind of counter that. But what I'm saying is, and then you pay this lip service to how you're not Islamophobic, except everything you've said in this gathering is completely Islamophobic, because what it does is essentializes and reifies. And
Yes, a question, please. Sorry.
So the question is, what exactly are you doing to make sure that your statements and your positions are not used to propagate Islamophobia by right-wing extremists? Because it's people like you that they put up front and say, look, this is why Muslims leave Islam.
Could you define Islamophobia for me, please?
What do you? I'm not sure I understand the question.
Define what it means.
Define Islamophobia.
Define Islamophobia.
Hatred and essentialization of a religion, a culture, which goes back 1,400 years, and a complete lack of history, which is, by the way, betrayed by completely...
So if I say that the Quran contains a verse which gives a husband the privilege of disciplining his wife, which is fact, if I just say that and nothing else, that's Islamophobic?
No.
So when does it become Islamophobic? When I say it's a bad thing, when I say it's this reflects how Islam is...
Yeah, I'll tell you. So if I can ask you a question. So it becomes Islamophobic when what you do is you present current political conditions, you present the viewpoints of certain political parties in certain post-colonial conditions, which, by the way...
What? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm saying if I was just to say that verse is evidence that...
Huh? Right, I've read the verse. It says you can't slap a woman until you've after you for 4 weeks. First you.
4 weeks is not mentioned in the verse at all.
No,
Okay, can we keep the focus on this question? Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Can you just wait? It's going to get. Can you finish and then we'll respond?
So
it's
yes,
better.
absolutely, that verse exists. But you see, this is exactly what I'm talking about, because there's 1,400 years of how that verse has been interpreted. There's an entire scholarly tradition of how that verse is meant to be interpreted, and there's a spectrum of opinions on that. And what you do is say, look at this is what the Salafis do, because they refuse to interpret. They read the Quran and says, look, it says cut off their heads. Look, it says kill the infidels. Except there's a whole context and a whole tradition going back 1,400 years of how it's been interpreted and applied. And you kind of erase all of that, and you say, look, this is what they're doing in Pakistan, and this is the problem with Islam. When, in fact, Islamic history will show you there's been just a multiple. You had various even genders in Islamic history. 5 different genders. Go to 10th century Baghdad, for example, where you even had women.
Okay. The question was, how are we?
I'm responding to you.
Okay. Well, I didn't actually understand what you meant by
Islamophobia, and I just did.
You said take. Okay, thank you. But I think what the viewpoint. I will just address one aspect of it. I think Mohammed has other things to say, but I've heard this before many times. This idea that when we point out that here are the problems within the religion, that we are actually aiding, we are the Taliban. We're equivalent to the Taliban. I've literally had someone say this to me, that we are, he just did as well. But I've had someone say this to me, that actually I am the same, because they think that there's this conservative version of Islam, and then that has real legitimacy behind it, and we say the same thing. First of all, there's something about that when we're talking about why ex-Muslims are demonized and the various ways we are demonized, this is one of the ways that we're demonized. So just pointing out a reality, and one that is widely shared by Muslims. So I don't have to pick the very extreme version of anything. I can show you polls from across the world where vast majorities of Muslims believe in something. Vast majorities of people from my country, Pakistan, believe that somebody like me should be killed. That's not a tiny percentage picked out from somewhere else. It's vast majorities, and that's a reality. And I don't want to get into a discussion of what is or isn't real Islam, because in fact it's not a true religion at all. Nothing's real in it. But I'm not going to talk about the degrees to which you believe that it is or isn't something that ascribes to the letter of the law. The fact of the matter is the vast majorities of people in the Muslim world do interpret it in this way. So unless you can find an explanation for why again and again we keep coming around to the same problems, and they're seen time and time again in Muslim countries. Muslim countries are some of the worst places in the world to be a woman, and you can look at bottom, like the worst 10 worst countries to be a woman, and there's Muslim majority countries are prominent in those lists, and they're prominent in I think, is there any other country, a non-Muslim country that has a capital punishment for apostates? As far as I know, there's none, and those are real issues, and I have to be able to talk about it. And I think your question was, what are we doing to talk about Islamophobia? I would like to just say that we are a group of people who are, there are vast majorities in the Muslim world who want us dead. There are Muslims here who want us dead, which is why there has to be a security guard over there. I would like to first talk about my issues. I would like to first talk about my rights and and the security threats that I live with, and then we can talk about how I should be helping Muslims put out better PR for other people out there. What I do and what I always talk about is that Muslims deserve the same civil liberties as anyone else, which is to say, I think that a Muslim extremist should be able to say that somebody that apostates should be killed because they're actually they're actually pushing people into the hellfire. I think they should be able to say that. That's extremist speech, that's hateful speech. They should be able to say it. I find the hijab extremely offensive to me, but I think Muslim women should be able to wear it. I will defend their civil liberties, their right to be offensive to me. And that is the way that I counter Islamophobia, and that is the way that I counter bigotry. But I will not stop talking about the very real issues that dissenters and women and apostates face in Muslim countries and in Muslim communities.
Sorry, I just want to also bring up.
Sorry, Mohammed wants to say something, and so do I. Oh, it's okay. Shall I go first? Okay. Just a couple of things. I mean, when you know, you say this is one interpretation, but yours is also one interpretation. And I think that's one of the problems, isn't it? Because everybody is interpreting how they want, which in a way is good, because that's why a lot of people pick and choose and explain religion to themselves in the way that it makes it compatible with their own beliefs. And which is why every religious person isn't out killing every every person who's not abiding by their religion, because they do pick and choose and they do interpret texts, and thank goodness for that. You know, but the point is, though, that this idea of interpretation doesn't look at the reality of things, which is that those who do interpret and those who do punish and those who do impose laws and have states are interpreting it a certain way, not just ISIS, but the Iranian regime, the Saudi regime, the Pakistani government, the 13 countries that execute apostates, for example. And so this isn't just about personal interpretation, it's also linked to political power as well. The other thing is this idea that if you criticize Islam, or you say that, you know, this is what Islam is anti-woman, as Christianity is, or Islam is homophobic, that you are saying the exact same thing as ISIS. And it's sort of like me telling you that you're remaining a Muslim is helping ISIS, because it's giving them the power base in which they can do what they want. And I think that's a false argument, because the reality is that ISIS has to be held responsible for what it does, in the same way that bigots and Islamophobes, as you call them, need to be held accountable for racism and bigotry. I think, you know, I don't like the term Islamophobia. I don't agree with it, because I think it conflates the idea that criticizing a religion or criticizing the religious right is the same as attacking or discriminating against people, inciting hatred against people, but it's not. It's not. You can be, I can hate Islam, which I do, to be honest, and I can hate the Islamists and the Iranian regime, which I do, to be honest. But you know, I love my parents who are Muslims, I have many Muslim friends, and I think that Muslims are just like myself. You know, the reality is that most Muslims are not Islamists, and thank goodness for that. Just as most Christians are not Christian right, just like most Jews are not Jewish right, who want Palestinians dead, just like most Hindus are not killing Muslims because they eat beef in India, just like most, you know, Buddhists are not killing Muslims in Myanmar or you know, Sri Lanka. I think there's a distinction between the religious right, between an idea, and between people. And I think this conflation aids the Islamists, because what it does is, in countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia, if we say the things that we say, we're immediately accused of blasphemy and apostasy, and you know, the jails are full of people who have had these accusations against them, facing long-term imprisonment and also the death penalty, or being killed by mob violence, you know, like Mashal Khan in Pakistan just quite recently, or a 17-year-old Yemeni, you know, shot dead in front of his home because he's an atheist. Here, you know, that sort of blasphemy and apostasy laws are being imposed on us, not by law, but de facto, by these accusations of Islamophobia, where it tries to silence criticism and also to conflate it as hatred. Look, you can criticize atheism. I'm a communist. You can criticize and hate communism. I hate communist Russia, for example, or most of the communisms in the world. I think they're totalitarianism. But you can hate an idea. You're not hating me or inciting hatred against me. And I think that's the distinction. I think one of the questions you should ask yourself, and I say this in all sincerity and, you know, in friendship, is that, you know, when there are people like us being murdered in the streets in many countries across the world, where so many young people, you know, just like yourself, don't have the right to think and live as they want, you should be focusing on them, not those of us who are trying to break free, who are trying to dissent, who are just fighting for basic human rights. And I think, you know, we're not the enemy. We're not the enemy, but unfortunately, so many people see us as the enemy. And that's part of the problem, you know, and to compare us with those who want us dead, it's, you know, victim blaming at its finest. You know, it's like blaming the woman who is raped for the way she dressed. It's exactly the same thing. You know, because of what we say, you know, we either deserve to die, we deserve to be punished, or we're the same as those who are trying to kill us. This is really, I mean, you should really think about these things when you say them. I find it incredible that people can still say that at a university in Boston.
So, anti-Muslim bigotry is a problem. Hating Islam is not a problem. The definition that you gave was Islam, religion, culture. Screw all of those. Religions have no rights, ideas have no rights, people have rights, civil liberties exist. You can have the most horrible idea in the world and you have the same rights as I do. It doesn't matter. Your actions are what get you punished in any way, shape, or form. Religious people have struggled with this a lot. Your ideas do not matter in the court of law regarding your civil liberties. As Sarah was saying, if you believe that apostates like me should be killed, you still have the same civil liberties as me. You can still say that and be okay. We have freedom of speech in America. Beyond that, I think it's insanely bigoted to reduce Muslims to their text. Most Muslims are against slavery. The Quran condones slavery. Muhammad was a slaver. Muhammad had sex slaves. Umar had sex slaves. Umar's slave murdered him. Most, I would say 99.99% of Muslims are better than Islam. And reducing them is a horrible, horrible thing to do. And that is why we have all these problems. The left gets confused when Muslims try to conflate Islam and Muslims. They're very, very different things. Muslims are better than Islam, and they will continue to get better every day. The text is static, and it will stay that way.
My name is Afsan. I'm an undergrad here studying computer science and economics. Thank you for bringing up these important points. I think everyone here agrees that human rights violations exist all over the world, whether in Muslim or non-Muslim countries. You know, I think that the key problem is extremism on both ends, and usually moderation is a key solution. So my question is, do you reach out to moderate Muslims in, you know, Muslim countries who are trying to reform these problems, and then how, like, what is the role for them in this fight for rights?
Can I just make a suggestion, because it's already almost 5 to 9. I wondered if people can just ask their questions and then we answer at the end, because I'm worried that we.
When do you have the room till?
Is that okay?
No, we have the room till 10.
Yeah, so
okay, it's okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Okay,
That
go
might
ahead.
be a good idea.
But maybe we can have like maybe two or three questions at a time,
I'm
or
talking too much.
Okay, I tend to forget the questions, but okay.
or do you want to answer
go
this
ahead.
one?
Just go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So regarding moderate Muslims, I don't know what that means. That's a very generic term. It could mean a million different things, and it means even liberal Muslims do mean different things. I hear from ex-Muslims all the time that my parents are liberal. I don't think they will murder me. That is not the definition of liberalism. So we need to first figure out what do you mean by moderate. So a better distinction from my perspective is somebody that is willing to acknowledge that there are flaws within Islam and or wants to reform things. That's one big distinction. I'm happy to work with people like that. I'm also happy to work with people that are working on civil liberties issues. I'm also happy to work with people that make the distinction between the mosque and state. The mosque has no role in the state. It should not have no role in any state anywhere in the world. I would say all, if not the vast majority of Muslim states, mosque and state is the same thing. And within the Pakistani constitution, it says that the laws are subservient to the laws of Allah. Tunisia, which is a liberal Muslim state, has the same thing. The first line of the constitution talks about the laws of Allah. And until we can abolish that, until religion becomes a personal thing, you will always have these sort of issues where critics of Islam are deemed as bad and people will go after them. And you can't have reform until you have that separation where you can talk about things frankly, regardless of where you stand on that.
Can I just add something? I mean, I don't really like the term moderate Muslims, because I think that Muslims are people like everybody else. We don't talk about moderates, I don't know, Englishmen, and we, you know, especially given that there is a far right in England, for example, you're right? Why it's this focus on Muslims, I think, and it goes back to this whole thing that we're talking about. When you homogenize groups, you make Islamists the authentic Muslim, and therefore you need to then talk about moderate Muslim and so on and so forth. So I work with lots of Muslims, and I think, especially in the One Law for All campaign against Sharia, and there are lots of Muslims who have supported ex-Muslims, you know, and I think one of the things that a lot of us can agree on is secularism. I think people can be believers and be secularists, and in that sense, there are lots of Muslim secularists, and I think, in fact, there's a lot more than we know, because don't forget, a lot of people are living in very difficult situations. So even a lot of these polls, honestly, I take with a pinch of salt, because I think if you're living in a totalitarian state, you'll say what you think you're supposed to say, but inside you say very many different things. And so in that sense, I think there's a lot more people who are pro-ex-Muslims, who are pro-LGBT rights, and who are secularists. I think, in fact, if you live in a theocracy, you're more secular than someone who lives in the US. You have to be, because it's a matter of life and death for you. You know, you can't walk down the street with a boyfriend. You can't wear what you want. You can't listen to certain music. Music is haram. This is haram. That's haram. And so to live your life, you come face to face with religion, and it becomes an issue for you. So I think we can work with lots of people as long as we are in agreement, basically minimally, that the societies need to be secular, where religion or not having a religion is a private affair. And I think that's one way in which we can and are working together, and it's an important one.
Kind of ties to the comment of moderate Muslim. Do you think that at the root of a lot of these problems is the very act of classifying people, or classification in general is just seemingly the baseline cognitive mode of perceiving and interfacing with the world. But when we apply it to people, we kind of go into tunnel vision mode and click, shove off to the side and act. So like, maybe part of what will aid getting the message out there is focusing on the fact that we do classify, we snap judge, and then we implement systematic policies across the board with little regard to the fact that every individual is an individual that falls into patterns of habits, beliefs, and behaviors, for sure. But there's exceptions. There's even exceptions in science, despite the fact that we kind of surface level judge it as like an absolute or like a concrete entity, like, you know, genetic modifications, mutations, epigenetic factors, like all these things like bring into question the very essence of what industry and PR operates on, which is blanket statements, messages that people take as the word of God, albeit a secular corporate God. But yeah, so like I guess I just asked, like, have you kind of thought along those lines as like that being, if not the root cause, like something fundamental to focus on?
I don't think it's the root cause, but I don't have an issue with classification. It depends on what you're classifying. So the moderate Muslim classification to me is meaningless. The classification of Muslims that are willing to stand up for the rights of everybody is meaningful. This classification of the people that are willing to stand up for women's rights is meaningful. And again, on that, the lines will blur between Muslim and Christian and Jew, because there are a lot of people in the Christian traditions that are homophobic. There are a lot of people in Jewish traditions that are homophobic. There are a lot of people in Muslim traditions that are homophobic. So if you're homophobic, that's a classification that is useful to counter those issues of why you're homophobic, to make a campaign to try to change those attitudes. So it's values are what matters.
Right, and as part of that campaign, hopefully people will end up meeting face-to-face more of these people and having conversations, because that is the most concrete, convincing experience. Actually meeting, talking, feeling out energy, seeing facial expressions, and not just reading text. Thanks.
Thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful discussion. So it's been a wonderful discussion to listen to. In terms of secularists, how do we as a group of secularists trying to preserve the idea of individual liberty and separation of church and state, how do we view that as from a community aspect rather than collectivism? Where the idea that groupthink versus the idea of individuals expressing ideas and debating ideas. How do you prevent people from becoming groupthink?
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question. Could you repeat that again? How do
you prevent
just groupthink in general?
How do we not just become another tribe?
Yeah, how do we not become another tribe and actually, you know, debate ideas rather than be collective, rather than act as one collective?
I mean, I think we really do need to go back to the concept of universal rights and citizenship, and see people as individuals and not tribes and communities and extensions of their tribes and communities. And I think, you know, that's a very big problem, because it does cause us not to be able to see the allies we have in those that are considered the other, and also the threat within our own groups, you know. And so I think we're living in a world in which there is no more universal rights, really. There's no more citizens. You know, now everything is divided into communities. It's sort of the Iraqization of the world, what they've done to Iraq. You know, it's Kurdish section, Sunni sections, Shia section. It's the same thing that's happening in the West as well. You know, you've got in Britain, you've got the so-called Muslim community. They have to go to Sharia courts. They have their own schools. You know, they're kept separate and unequal. And it's a way of managing minority communities on the cheap, as well as denying the sort of citizenship rights. I think just looking at things differently will help, you know, seeing people as individuals and also as citizens rather than religious beliefs or cultures and so on and so forth.
So for most of my life, I believed in a superstitious view of the world. I believed that there was Allah and all of these other scriptural elements. I realized that was wrong. If my worldview was entirely wrong, that opens me up to the idea that I can be wrong about a lot of other things. Where I stand today could be wrong. So having that humbleness or understanding that no matter what you believe in, no matter how passionately you believe in, be it on the left, right, secularism, whatever, you could be wrong. I think that's very, very important. So if you can convince me that I'm wrong about whatever idea, even about free speech, okay, we'll have that conversation. If you can convince me about Islam somehow, okay, we'll have that conversation. As long as all of us are open to the idea that I can be wrong, and then you can have those conversations, and it's harder to get trapped in groupthink because every individual in that group could be wrong.
I remember I was reading, I forget what study it was, where when people said what presidential candidate they voted for, people had significantly more animosity towards each other than if they were to lay out their specific policy positions, even if their policy positions were exactly.
It's a human thing. We're tribal in nature. We were always tribal historically. We're trying to overcome our biology. Our biology is tribalism. Next.
Hi. First of all, thanks a lot for coming here. It takes a lot of courage, I know, to come out like this. And you know, continuing on what you said, and what gentleman said here, what is Islamic culture? You know, my culture from North India is probably very similar to his culture from Pakistan, but we still have two countries just on the basis of religion. You know, so religion is that elephant that, you know, everyone wants to ignore. But my question is, what's your objective? Is your objective, you know, talking about, you know, anti-sexism, equality, you know, gender equality, race equality? Because what, and this is not a rhetorical question, because what happens is when you start talking about religion and anti-religion, atheism, then many of the believers in the group, they kind of, you know, they don't get the message. They kind of get dissociated. So is that strategy right? That's what my question is.
All of us were Muslim, all of us were confronted with certain things, and we became non-Muslim. Simply confronting people does change ideas.
Can I also add? I mean, I think that's part of the problem is, why can't a believer hear what I have to say? I think believers have more strength than they're given credit for. In the same way that I, as a non-believer, can sit down and speak with the believer, and we can agree to disagree, I'm sure it's the same the other way around. It is this sort of patronizing, infantilizing view of Muslims that, you know, the minute you criticize Islam, they can't handle it. Well, I think there are some Muslims in here and they're handling it all right, and we're able to have a conversation. We might not agree with a lot of things, but I think the other point is that, and it's a brilliant title that, you know, ex-Muslims of North America have, Normalizing Dissent. And that is important. Look, when you're not allowed to speak, when you can be killed for speaking and for criticizing, it's important to make it normal, to break taboos, so that we can have more of these conversations without anyone getting killed. So I think, you know, you can't say, for me, I think if you want to talk about gender equality, you can't talk about it outside of the context of religion. You can't. And this is the same when you look at feminists before us. All of them, one of their main challenges was religion, you know, whether it was Christianity. You know, I gave a quote about how religion is one of the greatest bulwarks against women's emancipation. So obviously, in our context and with our backgrounds, and given the fact that, you know, there are theocracies where women's rights are violated to such great degree, and of course women's rights are violated everywhere, and capitalism reproduces violence against women because it's helpful for it, as it does racism and everything else. But again, looking at Islamic context, you do see gross violations of women's rights, and religion is used as a justification for it. So we should be able to talk about women's rights and criticize religion at the same time, and to think that people are able to handle differences of opinion without resorting to violence. And I think most people are able to do it.
Thank you.
I think just in addition, that's not necessarily answering your question, but just to tack on what Maryam said. For me, it was, the reason I do talk about this is the desire to bring this conversation from a perspective that is rooted in concepts like human rights and civil liberties, because there are plenty of people who are willing to have conversations about Islam who will say that, okay, well, Islam is, you know, this and that towards women, but usually they come from, you know, they come from the far right. They come from people who who I think would say that, okay, people like my parents should be, you know, kicked out of this country, and who would advocate for policy positions that I think would be, you know, that I think would be terrible. But there has been a silence from the left, from liberals in general, and I think I touched on this a little bit, and we've talked about this in different ways, but there's a hesitancy to even speak about this because you don't want to be labeled, and you also don't want to add into Islamophobia, or I don't like that word because I don't know exactly what that means, but anti-Muslim bigotry. You don't want to aid that. So let's just not have that conversation, is the conclusion that many people have. Let's just not even talk about it. And I think there needs to be a voice that comes from, you know, this side of the aisle, you know, my side of the aisle, which is I'm a liberal. So I think that this voice needs to be there and needs to be having that conversation. Otherwise, the only people who we see who are going to be honest at all about this faith are going to be the people on the far right. And if they win enough credibility based on this issue, because people can look up Quranic verses for themselves and they can see for themselves like what's happening around the world, and if they gain credibility due to this, then it is Muslims that will hurt as well. So I think that it's important for those of us who do believe that Muslims deserve rights as citizens to be talking about problems within the faith when we see them.
Can I just add something on this issue? And I think you know, I myself am very firmly on the left, and I think in fact a lot of the fight against the religious right is taking place from the left in Iran, in Iraq, in Pakistan, secular and very often left progressive women, men, and so on and so forth. I don't think the far right is telling the truth about Islam, in the sense that they're using it as a way of targeting Muslims and migrants. So they're not telling the full truth, because you can even say that Islamists are sometimes telling the truth when they talk about US militarism and the brutality of you know, bombardments in Iraq and so on and so forth. So the Islamists also say some truths, but I think it's not the full truth, and that's where it becomes dangerous, because it's serving a certain interest and so on and so forth. And that's why I think with the far right, for me, Islamism is a far right movement. And they're really fundamentally very similar to each other. And the far right in the West is also trying to defend a religious right regime. We're seeing with Trump now the reality of what that means for people. And also with the rise of, let's say, UKIP and all in Britain, we're seeing what its effects are. So I think it's important to make that distinction, that there are left who apologize for Islamism, but there's lots of right-wing governments as well, and we often don't hear that enough because there is this focus on the left. And I think part of it is because we think they should be our allies, but a lot of right-wing governments, let's just take the Tories in Britain, who support Islamism, who are friendly and cozy with Islamic states, the US as well, with Saudi Arabia, funding them, giving them military arms, helping them even in torture techniques and so on and so forth. You know, so it's important to remember that their hands are drenched in blood, you know, in a large extent. But also I think it's this idea that, you know, we need to be silent because there's racism. It's like telling Muslims, you need to be silent because of ISIS. Why? Why do I need to be silent? I'm not ISIS and I'm not the far right. I have a right to speak just as anyone else. And the example I always give is, I'm anti the Iranian regime and I'm anti-US militarism. I don't want the US to bomb Iran. But should I stay silent about US militarism because I'm against the Iranian regime? Or should I stay silent about the Iranian regime because I'm afraid of US militarism? Why can't I speak out against both? You know, and that's the thing, that we are complex human beings. We fight for many different things every day in our lives. We fight for women's rights, for gay rights. We fight for the right to our children to have a free education, a proper education. We fight for our libraries to stay open. We fight on many fronts. But when it comes to this issue, suddenly we become, you know, these one-dimension people who can't do anything but either feed into racism or feed into Islamism. Why?
To go back to your talk about what you mentioned about Northern India. So you're from Northern India, I'm from Pakistan, I'm willing to bet our cultures are very similar, even if our original religions were very different. So I don't really subscribe to the Islamic culture sort of thing. I disagree with that entirely. There's a slight overlay of a few religious rituals on that, but India, Pakistan share a culture. Pakistan and Arabia, and Pakistan and Morocco, Pakistan and Malaysia do not. That's one side of it. The other side of it is, in India right now, you've got a Hindu right-wing government that's in power. Now, if we double the number of conservative Hindus in India, somehow magically, what will happen? Bad things will happen for everybody, right? If we double the number of evangelicals in America, bad things will happen. So in order to prevent that, what we need to do is we need to make people take their religion less seriously, be it in India, be it in America. We understand that. The same concept applies to Muslims and Muslim countries as well. If twice as many, if 20%, 40% of Muslims no longer believed in Islam, our task to separate mosque and state becomes much more easier. So we need to convince people about the problems within Islam so they can walk away from that and they can advocate for secularism. One other issue is there are a lot of people that are on the same page as we are. There was a poll in Saudi Arabia that 5% of people are atheists. There's a poll by Pew about America that 15 to 23% of people that were born Muslim no longer believe in the religion. I don't know if they're Christian or atheist or whatever, but they're no longer Muslim. They exist. So we need to activate those people to stand up and start talking about these issues and push back against religious conservatism. You want to be a religious conservative, keep it in your home and that's it. And even then you need to know that most people in the world believe and understand, not just believe, understand that this is false.
Thank you. Okay, I'm James Harris, and I'm an alum. And I have to say you came to the right city because we had a patrol officer who was killed by a radical Islamic terrorist, you know about. And we also have a, can you hear me okay? With Namazie, who is the leading vote-getter, or was in the city council, and he is the founder of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, for Cambridge and maybe for Boston, I don't know. I asked him there was a rally for free speech in Boston. I ran into him and I said, well, do you know that CARE is a terrorist group? Yeah. So but my question would be, how do we deal with this guy, or with the, you know, that kind of problem in Cambridge, because he actually cost one of my friends a seat on the council by telling lies about him. And he has a lot of support. A lot of very good people support him. So, do you have any tactical, is there anything that I can do? You may want to talk to me afterwards.
It's not an easy task. This is a long-term task. We have a long-term structural issue where people don't understand the problem. So the name of CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations. Why does America need relations with Islam? The issue is we need to defend Muslim civil liberties. So if you want to create an ACLU subdivision that is focused on Muslim civil liberties, great, I will support that. The issue is that CARE itself mixes Islam and Muslim. Their website, when they talk about Islamophobia, they say Islam and Muslim. That is deliberate because they're a religious group. They're like the Catholic League. The Catholic League wants to defend Catholics and Catholicism. We need to understand the...
Well, I'm sorry, I'm asking for tactical help. I don't know if you can give me any.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an issue. I don't know the person you're mentioning, so I can't comment on him particularly. But this is a problem we have in Britain as well, where there are Islamists who are becoming part of the NHS or the National Health Service or part of local governments, part of universities, and they are imposing an Islamist agenda. And I think the only thing that you can do, apart from the fact that of course people have the right to have their own opinions and to express them, but if there's anything illegal going on, which is basically not a question of, for example, freedom of expression, but inciting violence against people, or there's information of links. For example, one of the researches we've done with Sharia courts in Britain, which is often promoted as, a Muslim thing, whereas in fact, really, they're run by Jamaat-e-Islami and, the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're linked with Islamist organizations. So I think tactically, it would be first of all doing research and finding facts about any links, any illegal activities that are going on, particularly links with the Islamic movement. Those are things that we've done that have helped highlight some of the people who are problematic.
Yeah, if you could do that here, just to educate people about CARE. Because right now, the progressives tend to think of them as a progressive group, and they're just the opposite. And of course, Trump is coming down on the Muslim Brotherhood, and that will possibly cut off some of their funding, which would be good.
That gains the left's sympathies. It's a lose-lose situation. What we need to do is we need to get Muslims to stand up against secular Muslims, to stand up for the civil liberties of Muslims without involving Islam. There are secular Muslims out there. They just need to make the effort to take over from conservative Muslims. Right now, all of these organizations are run by religious conservatives.
Okay, can we get to the next question, please?
I'd like to start off by saying, once again, just like everybody else was saying, great discussion. So, I think it's hard not to bring up, when we talk about the quote-unquote Muslim diaspora, it's hard not to bring up the topic of race, because there's many different colors and races amongst quote-unquote Muslim countries. So, my question to you is, so for white Muslims that have been transitioning out of Islam, I'm just wondering if you'd be able to answer, I'm just wondering what their experience was like. Or people that, because I think there's this common misconception in the West that the Muslim world, everybody within the quote-unquote diaspora is brown.
So you were asking specifically if you knew of any experiences of people.
Yeah, I'm just saying, with people you've talked to, I'm just wondering, for white Muslims that have been transitioning out, or people from maybe from Turkey or Bosnia, those kind of countries.
Yeah, I have a friend. All I can say a little bit about his experience. You can look up. We've been doing a project called Life Beyond Faith, and we've been recording ex-Muslims and their experiences, and the idea is to show the wide variety of Muslims from where they come from and their positions, and with some of them differences in experiences with how their family dealt with their apostasy. With some were surprisingly positive, and some were not. But one of them is covering this man. His name is Lawan. He is an Iraqi Kurd. And he's ginger, so he's very, very white looking. and he was sharing with me his experience of being an ex-Muslim, and then wanting to talk about Islam and in a critical way, and immediately he gets these people around him like, but you're white, you can't say this, and how dare you, you're being a racist. And he's like, well, no, he has to say, no, I'm actually, I look very white, but I'm from Iraq actually, and I'm a Kurd, and this is my community, right? But it made me think that I don't know if everyone would agree, but I don't think that necessarily just by being an ex-Muslim you gain some like deep insight that is unable that people who are not ex-Muslim just cannot access. There's this idea that if you're born into a certain race or a certain or that you have this knowledge that other people just can't have. So these sorts of this sort of argument is used to often shut down people who don't belong to a certain race, and then say that you cannot be a part of this conversation. And I think that people who are white passing ex-Muslims often hit this wall more directly than someone like me who's very clearly not white. So I think that their experiences are complex in a different way, particularly when they get out. Having said that, their experiences with anti-Muslim bigotry might be different too, because they are white passing in a certain way, because plenty of people think that I'm still Muslim, and the reason I talk about anti-Muslim bigotry as well is because I do still face it, because people will hear my name or they'll see me with my parents and my family and will be dressed in traditional clothes, and they will assume that, and then I will get it. So I know that it still exists because it's still something that's very prevalent. I think Maryam talked about this. People don't know what Muslims look like, and they assume that someone who looks very white can't possibly be Muslim. So I think the experience is different in a variety of different ways.
Hi, I arrived late, so I'm sorry if this was addressed in some other form or something, but Dissent is not obviously normalized yet, and not exactly safe either. But one of the things I fear is wasting my time, and I don't think I'm doing that, but I see three groups with just basic infidels and ex-Muslims, and then the reformers within the religion. And I was wondering if you guys saw different roles, or if you supported reformers like Imam Tawhidi, or if you don't, do you see dissent within the religion as more important or less important, or it doesn't matter unless we can it's normalized for everybody?
Okay. As far as I'm not going to go into specifics here, but as far as Imam Tawhidi, I've seen some of his tweets, and I think this guy, I disagree with him in many, many ways, and I think he does add into anti-Muslim bigotry. So there's quite a bit different aspects of his approach that I don't agree with.
Maybe a bad example. Sorry if I'm not up to date with all the things he said, but
he mentioned that Sahih Bukhari should be banned, which is a collection of hadiths that Sunnis like. He himself comes from a Shia background. It's a partisan thing that he's saying. And not to mention, we believe in free speech. We don't ban things, period.
Well, there's quite a bit of his approach that I don't agree with. But as far as reform in general, that's something that I find to be, I would say, is maybe a little bit of a waste of time. Now, the reason I still ally with reform, and I still say that I help, that I want to help and support reformists, is because I may be wrong, and I know that I may be wrong, and I hope that I am wrong, and I hope they are able to make a lot of strides. I just think that it is so much more difficult to argue for certain things from within the faith. And I think women's rights is a very strong example of this, and a very powerful one. And you can see this time and time again where, in Pakistan a couple of years ago, there was, I think, a law passed to ban domestic violence, and the groups that were formed to present a challenge to this law, there were so many people that were unhappy with it, and there were religious groups. The vast majority of them were religious groups. I think there was 35 religious organizations that came together to oppose a law banning domestic violence, because they said, well, Islamically, we have the right to do this. So I think when you're talking about reform and interpreting the text one way or another, the words still mean means something. And what you can choose to do is to look up, you know, the word beat when it comes to the verse of a husband being able to discipline his wife. You can try and define that in a way that is not so harmful. You can, you know, you can go through different interpretations and talk about context and all these things, but all of that is just a practice of mitigating the harm inherent within a verse while still saying that the text within it, the text that contains it, is holy and is perfect and is a moral guide for us to follow. That's a hard line to walk. I'm not sure if many people are being convinced. I would love to be wrong about this, but this is partially why I think we should just need to abandon this line of argument altogether.
Can I just add? I think reform in any religion is a matter of power, really. That there is, you know, that it's pushed out of political power and in a sense forced to reform. So I think when people who are powerless are discussing reform, it might feel good for them, you know, but it's not really effective. What we need is an enlightenment against Islam and what is really an inquisition, an Islamic inquisition today. And I think that is taking place in the Middle East, in North Africa and South Asia in many ways. It is bubbling from below. It's a very explosive situation, particularly given the fact that so many people are young in that region. You know, they are young, and religion just naturally is standing in their way, you know, and so there's obviously this conflict. So I think, you know, we need to focus on that. Anything, though, that helps to make it okay to criticize. And I think that's where the reformers come in. That's very good, is that, well, they're saying that you can be Muslim and challenge and criticize, and I think that's helpful. Anything that challenges or criticizes. I agree with Sarah, I don't think how useful it is. But I think how we can all work together, whether we're atheists, anti-religion, pro-religion, is secularism. And I think that can be a minimum precondition, because the reality is that even Muslims who are smiling at us talking will have to agree, if they're honest, that they can practice their religion better here than they can in a place like Iran or Saudi Arabia. Because not every Muslim agrees with the Iranian regime's Islam or the Saudis' version of Islam. And so I think secularism is good for us atheists because we don't have a theocracy killing us or imprisoning us. And it's good for Muslims because, as you can see in Pakistan, Muslims are in prison for blasphemy, you know. And so I think that's where I've worked with lots of Muslims in the One Law for All campaign, is for a defense of secularism, you know, so an end to religious arbitration, whether it's the Jewish Beth Dins, whether it's the Sharia courts against gender segregation at schools, whether it's a Jewish school or an Islamic school. And that's been a great way of organizing with women, including many believing women. Though, I mean, it's hard for believing women, I think. I mean, they do often say that they feel very uncomfortable with some of the things we say. And I always say, but I don't feel uncomfortable with what you say, even though I hate Islam. So get used to it. It's okay, you know, it's okay not to agree. This is just part of being adults and being, you know, citizens in the 21st century. It's okay. And I think it's just something that people have to get used to.
Can I just ask to clarify recently, or no?
Sorry, I think we are running out of time, but maybe we can talk later. I think these gentlemen have been waiting for a long time. In the interest of time, can we take both of your questions together and then both of these gentlemen's questions together?
Sure. Hi, thank you for your talk. My question is about the tactic of leaving Islam in order to normalize dissent, specifically with regard to disempowering right-wing conservative scholars or political groups from dominating the mainstream of the Islamic narrative. Does it make more sense as a tactic to leave the religion and say that the only way we can support these values is outside the scope of religion? Or does that further empower people who are from that right-wing interpretation from dominating the narrative of what religion is, and then people who are naturally drawn to religion because of faith or family or community will then think that that right-wing version of religion is the only way that they can connect with faith? So
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, so this is obviously like one of the most pre-stigmatized and contaminated areas of like intellectual discourse. So, as we try to take this conversation out into the world, how do we navigate through that so that we can reach, our, liberal friends who just read New York Times and Slate and BuzzFeed and kind of already have this idea of, us being, Islamophobes as soon as we mention care in a slightly unfavorable light, and if that's an overly redundant question, where it may be, how can we best get involved?
I will just say shortly, as far as leaving Islam as a tactic to normalize dissent, this may just be nitpicking on the terminology there, but I didn't leave the religion as a tactic for anything. I mean, I left because I found it to be not true and not something that made a lot of sense to me, and that's why I left the faith. And then it so happens that also it runs against a lot of the values that I hold today. But one thing that I think is sort of implicit in that argument is the idea that if you leave Islam, you've left Muslims, and that you just cannot have an effect anymore because you've left it all to the religious because you were just not a part of those conversations anymore. But it's not as if, it's not as if I've left my family. I'm still going home for, Thanksgiving and bothering everybody. And I'm still having that effect. And in fact, having somebody, knowing an atheist, I mean, it's just kind of like the gay rights movement, where there was this idea of knowing somebody who was gay, just knowing them, had an impact in how you thought of, religious pluralism and all these different things. So the same thing happens with Muslims, in that just having an atheist, suddenly they're not so terrible because this person and they're not a horrible human being, and maybe you're having arguments with them, and maybe some of them kind of sort of make sense, and you become a little bit more liberal just by those interactions. So it's not the case that I have left Islam, but I haven't left Muslims. I'm still engaged with my family, and to the extent that the community is acceptable of it, I'm engaged with them as well.
BBC just did a front page story on the tour. The first message I got was from a friend I've known since first grade, who is Muslim, who is in the Middle East, texting me, please be careful. So simply because we've left religion doesn't mean we've left everybody we care about, or that they have left us. And we do influence that every single day. It's easy to say that random person that holds that random horrible idea should be killed. It's very hard to say that when it's your child, when it's your parent, when it's your brother, when it's your sister, when it's your childhood friend. So it forces you to moderate your view on how seriously you take these scriptures.
Yeah, can I mean, just to add to what Sarah said, I mean, you don't become an atheist out of tactical reasons, or I know there are some believers that do remain believers for tactical reasons, and I think that's dishonest, to be frank. I mean, I think we need to be honest and to live the life that we want. And even with the terminology ex-Muslim, I mean, again, I hate the term, to be honest. Because I think, why define yourself with something you've left? But again, it's only because people can get killed for it, and that it's important for the world to see that there is dissent within the Muslim community. We aren't homogenous, and we do have atheists within us, and stop killing us, and we won't call ourselves ex-Muslims anymore, and we'll just get on with our lives, and like everybody else does, So I think from that perspective, again, seeing it as tactical doesn't see us as people, as individuals, and I think we do that so much. All of us do. We don't see this as an individual decision. It always is somehow associated with the group. And to be honest, there are many ex-Muslims that I would never stand with. I think they're bigots. I think they feed into the far right narrative. you know, and I wouldn't stand with them. They're atheists. I don't agree with Sam Harris and Muslim profiling. You know, it just because I'm an atheist doesn't make me part of a group. Just because I'm ex-Muslim doesn't make me part of a group. But there's a reason why we call ourselves ex-Muslim. So I wanted to say that. The other thing I wanted to just give you an example of is this idea that our criticism of Islam feeds into anti-Muslim bigotry. And I want to give you this example. There was, in Britain, there was this court case where a woman went and complained, a Muslim woman went and complained about the lack of rights that she received in a Sharia court. And the British court then came and said that her rights were violated and she deserves equal cut, you know, equal financial thing to her husband to get the same amount, because under Sharia she received nothing. Now the husband came in the media and he said that this judgment is anti-Muslim bigotry, but isn't the wife a Muslim as well? You know, and I think again, why is he the representative of Muslims and not her, for example? And I think a lot of this homogenization is doing exactly that. We are automatically the enemy because we're ex-Muslims, you know, and a Muslim, even if he is defending death by stoning, you know, if he's defending, and it's very often a he, if he's defending, you know, woman's subservient status, he's the authentic Muslim. And, you know, very often people won't question or challenge him in the same way that they will us. So I think it's really important to think about these things. And particularly, I think, you know, I say that to people who are believers, you know, and who see us, who smirk at us, who compare us with the Taliban. I really ask them to think about their beliefs and the fact that, you know, the sort of, their anger to the dehumanization of Muslims, which I share, they don't seem to be that angry when it comes to dehumanizing ex-Muslims, for example, or people who criticize the faith, you know. And I think people need to really think about that and challenge themselves as well.
Regarding the other question regarding the New York Times and Slate and stuff, we've been covered by both of those. So I would say support people that are secular Muslims, reformists, and things like that, and also push back against anti-Muslim bigotry as much as you can. Unless Muslims feel like they belong, reform can't happen. If you feel like you're under siege, you won't reform, you won't engage with new ideas. And people on the left, when they have that equivocation where they instinctually see something wrong when Christians say it, but it's okay when Muslims say it, call them out for being the bigots they are. When Raza Aslan defends slavery or says that it never happened, he is lying and he should be pointed out as that. And somebody that aids that due to his skin color definitionally is a bigot.
I just, to add just a little bit to what Muhammad was saying, and the idea that actual like unfairness that is very visible is just makes it so much harder for Muslims to see themselves as citizens, and then therefore they're not as involved in the community and you know, immersing themselves within society, which are all good things and which we want them to do. And it's one of the reasons why I am so against banning the hijab. I mean, that's not really much of a question in the United States, but abroad that's been touched on here and there. There's different aspects of it, but there were some French towns, I think, a couple of years ago, that a French town which banned the burkini, which was this like Muslim swimwear, and it was just, it covered her head, showed the face, but it was kind of like a wetsuit, like a very loose wetsuit. And the town wanted to ban it, and there was caused like quite a you know, public dialogue that was very interesting. But I was squarely against the banning of such a garment because there's no security reason. The woman's face is there, it's showing, and it was a way where it was very clear that the law was treating Muslims differently than they would anybody else that was just wearing a garment like that. That was specifically targeting this religion. And if we're going to have laws, they need to be applied fairly to everyone, including Muslims. And one point, especially against the banning of the burkini in particular, that some of my former hijabi friends shared with me, was that if when I was my friend said to me that if when I was a hijabi, and part of my life I was a forced hijabi. When I was hijabi, if this had been banned, if I couldn't wear something like the burkini when I was going to the beach, that would have meant that I couldn't go to the beach. That's what my family would have told me. They would have told me, now you can't go to the beach. And suddenly a freedom that I did have would no longer exist to me. So when we talk about, you know, ways to protect the weak and everything when it comes to women's rights especially, we have to be careful about how we're phrasing things and who we are really going to hurt in those circumstances.
Can I just add, though, that the burkini ban in that French town was actually the work of a far-right mayor, and the Constitutional Court in France declared it illegal. So the burkini is not banned in France. And I think there is a lot of misinformation as well on what is happening with regards banning. And I think there are several, it's quite complex. With the face veil, it's a question of security in the same way that someone can't walk around in a motorcycle helmet, for example. In schools, it's got to do with the concept of laïcité and secularism, and the fact that government officials, whether it's in a court or in a school, cannot proselytize and wear their religious symbols and show their religious symbols. So it doesn't apply only to Muslims, it applies to people wearing the cross, it applies to Jews wearing the kippah. So it's not a Muslim hijab ban as well. And I think, of course, while adult women have the right to veil, with regards to child veiling, I do think it's a form of child abuse. So I think with regards to the issue of the veil, it's important to talk about all of its manifestations as well. Thank you.
So we'll take these last two questions together, and we'll end with that.
Okay. So my question is, can you tell us a little bit about the place of Quran, the view of Quran in Muslim societies in 2017 versus other religious scriptures in their respective societies? How they're different, and if that affects what we're seeing, if that will improve for the better or worse. What's your experience and opinion? So if you look historically at the Christian countries, like countries where Christianity was or is a majority religion, and the way these countries transitioned to sort of like a more secular state of affairs, you could argue that this was possible because there are passages in the Bible that allow for separation of state and church, right? The Caesar, stuff like that. So, to the best of my knowledge, such passages are not present in the Quran. I know scholars of Islam things, especially in these issues, but that seems to be the case. So, if countries where Islam is the major religion, you're
wild, son. You're like crazy. Oh shit.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So if countries where Islam is the majority religion are ever going to transition to a more secular political system, do you think this transition is going to be as sort of like smooth as in the Christian countries, or is it going to be a little more
like 30 years war or something
like more abrupt, like revolution?
So first off, it wasn't smooth. There were 100-year wars. Catholics killed Protestants. Protestants killed Catholics. It was bloody, and it's been 500 years, and it still is not smooth. Major change doesn't happen easily. Humanity, we resist change. Regarding the passage difference, that matters. But why the difference is that in the 15th century, when Christianity came into contact with science and the Enlightenment and all these issues happened, we were in a very different world. We understood very little. With Islam, that's not the case. Islam is coming into it with a fully realized understanding of the universe, of evolution, of all of these other issues. So it's much harder to bridge that gap. You can't walk straight over. So at least from my perspective, it's much easier to leave Islam entirely than try to work around the corners. And we can convince enough Muslims to leave Islam that secularism becomes possible.
Or it doesn't even have to be, it doesn't have to be leave Islam, you know? I mean, I think that's, some people say, oh, well, you're gonna try to apostatize, you know, 1-point-something billion people. But that's not that's not my goal. I mean, it would be great if we could realistically get there, but I don't think that that's necessary in order to have the change that we want. Which is to say, if there was just a little bit more of a doubt in the idea that Muslims have only the sole source, the perfect source of truth, and there's this phrase, there's this idea that I've heard sometimes from Christians and even from conservative Christians that, you know, they'll say that I'm a Christian, but, and then they'll say something else. I'm a Christian, but I, you know, think gay rights are really important, right? So what they say, what that means is that they acknowledge that here, I am a Christian, I do hold this faith, but here's a way where in which I think this faith is maybe not doing the right thing, and I am walking away from it. And so, you know, intellectually, it's important that this phrase is the one that's used because they still hold that identity, yet they acknowledge it's not perfect. And that sort of thing is not that common in Muslim communities. You don't say, I'm a Muslim, but, you know, all these extra things. They'll say, actually Muslim, in Islam, gay rights are actually, have always been important and they'll always will be. There's some sort of a, there's this, what they'll do is they'll form Islam to where they are, instead of saying, well, actually, I've just departed from Islam in this way. And I think if we can get more Muslims to just adopt that kind of language, that'll be an indication that some change has happened, that they see that this is not the only perfect way of reaching truth.
I think it's not so much passages that matter, but politics and power. And I think you know, you can find horrendous passages in the Quran, in the Bible. Yeah, exactly. And I think you can find some very good passages in the Quran as well. You know, so I think it's not about passages, but about how much power the religious right have, really. And even if you look at the religious right, they're first and foremost political movements, not even religious movements, because they use religion when it suits them, and they'll use other things when it doesn't, you know. So it is because they're trying to maintain power. And I think taking that power away, so supporting, showing solidarity with political and social movements that are fighting to change theocratic regimes, like in a place like Iran, supporting women fighting against male guardianship rules in Saudi Arabia, defending secular activists in Pakistan, for example. These are all important ways in challenging the religious right, more so than looking at specifics in the passages of the Quran and so on, I think. The other issue is that, you know, you mentioned that does the Quran have more of a place than in other religions? I think what we're seeing now is the rise of the religious right, not just Islamic right, but we're seeing very clearly now the rise of the Christian right again, the Buddhist right in some places. The Hindu right runs India now. It is very scary what they're doing. You know, and of course we know about the Jewish right and what's happening in the Palestinian territory. So I think again it's because Islamists have so many countries and state power in so many places that the extent of their brutality is seen to a much greater extent. But I think fundamentally they're all very similar movements. And again, I think that it's part of it is criticizing religious text, but that's only, you can only go so far with that. You've got to get the religious right out of political power so that people can actually criticize text and live to tell the tale, you know. And I think that's where it comes back to the issue of politics and power. But I just want to add one last thing is that, you know, we are living in an internet age, and I do think social media and the internet is helping to exacerbate the protest and help people who dissent to link up in ways that didn't exist during the Enlightenment, for example. And so I think hopefully we can push it won't be as long as it took the Enlightenment against Christianity.
So regarding your specific question, one huge distinction is that Muslims view the Quran as the direct, literal word of God. Within Christianity, it wasn't Jesus dictated something and people wrote it down. St. Paul and others, and then you had Mark and all of this. So it was more divinely inspired. So it isn't as central as the Quran is. From my perspective, the hadiths are hadiths are the sayings of Muhammad, are better analogous to the Bible. There's nothing analogous to the Quran on the Christian side. So one of the larger arguments that happened back in the day between the rationalists, the Mutazilates, and the conservatives, the Ash'arites, was about whether God created the Quran when he told Muhammad, or did it exist forever? So that was enough that it triggered an inquisition in the Muslim world. So that is the centrality of the text, that when was it created was enough for an inquisition. So there's somewhat of a distinction between Christianity and Islam from that textual perspective.
Can I just add, though, that I think that Muslims, again, like any other religious believers, don't necessarily always follow the text to the T. I mean, I was born a Muslim just because I live in Iran. I was born in Iran, right? And my grandfather was an imam. My last name means prayer. But I never had read the Quran. I never prayed. I didn't fast during Ramadan, but my dad did. He never forced me to do it. My dad married a Christian who then converted to Islam. But I have uncles who've married Hindus, and it was just very open-minded, and none of them were religious fanatics or even took the Quran literally. So again, a lot of people are born into a religion. They grow up being called that religion. It's sort of stamped on your forehead, but not necessarily taking things literally. And that's why we don't have everyone killing everybody else, of all religions, because if anybody took their text literally, that is what they would have to do, wouldn't they? So.
Okay. Well, I wanted to thank everybody for coming out. It was great talking to you all.
Thank you.
One other comment, if you know ex-Muslims that would be interested in meeting other ex-Muslims or participating in communities, we are in about 25 cities across the US and Canada. Go to our website, exmna.org. There's a join button. Okay, right there. So if for ex-Muslims to find other people is relatively hard, and this is one way you can do it.